When police arrived at the scene, they found a body of a woman that had been badly beaten.
She had numerous injuries, more than 20 in total, mainly to her head.
She was covered in blood. It was a shocking sight.
She'd been battered to death. It looked like there'd maybe been a burglary.
The house had been ransacked.
The fact that this has happened in broad daylight, at a time when people are taking their children to school, it strikes fear throughout everybody.
A lot of people are scared living around here.
You just can't believe that it's happened.
The big fear is that our community is then under threat.
In the heart of the East Midlands lies historic Lincoln.
It's just got a wonderful, timeless feeling to it, Lincoln. We are a place of great historical interest. We've got everything, castles, cathedrals. There's a great many medieval churches, and there's a great waterway in the centre as well, the Brayford, established by the Romans. So we are a good tourist destination. And people like the fact we're not overly commercialised. We just think it's a wonderful, vibrant place.
And in recent years, Lincoln has become increasingly popular with overseas students.
The university, which is a huge university and, well, pretty much world famous, they've got colleges as well. Well, there are a lot of students, and a lot of the students are foreign nationals, many from the East Asian area. There is a nice mix.
To the south of Lincoln, on the River Witham, lies the suburb of Sincil Bank.
Sincil Bank area of Lincoln is a very tight-knit community, being adopted by the students and working-class Lincoln folk. A stone's throw away from the football ground. It does have a very villagey feel. You will see children playing football in the street.
The Sincil Bank community is very diverse. I've been a resident my whole life, and we have a lot of people that are from different ethnic backgrounds. And because we're so close to the university and stuff, we do get a lot of uni students coming to live down here, especially now that the university's getting more popular. We also have a lot of elderly people, but we always try and find a way to build that community together. It's more like a village. People are always supportive of each other.
It's just a nice, friendly place. Everybody knows everybody on the street and everybody chats with everybody. All the kids play out together. It's got a proper community vibe.
It's very close to the South Common, which is the major green area in the south of Lincoln.
You know, there's a lovely park there where people go and walk their dogs and can go and sit. So you have got the nice, idyllic, peaceful park only a short distance away.
But the peace is shattered on one summer's day. At 12:20 p.m, police are called to an address in Sincil Bank.
When police arrived at the scene, they found a body of a woman that had been badly beaten. She had appeared to have been beaten with a blunt object.
The crime scene is secured.
The police came, they cornered off the streets, they weren't allowed anywhere near your houses and stuff. No one really told us what happened.
A murder investigation is immediately launched, and it's not long before the body is identified as 29-year-old student Mingzi Yang. But who is Mingzi, and how had she become a victim of such a brutal murder?
Mingzi Yang was originally from China. She came to the UK in 2008, and she was studying English at Lincoln College. Initially, she lived in the Humberside area, and in 2012, she moved to the address in Sincil Bank, where she lived with her partner, who she'd met fairly recently, Darren Grundy, and her young 5-year-old son.
Mingzi's son was from a previous relationship, but Darren quickly became part of the family.
As a couple, they were engaged to be married and were due to get married the following year.
But on the 17th of June, Darren had grown increasingly worried throughout the day when Mingzi failed to answer her phone.
He'd gone to work and he'd been trying to get hold of her throughout the day and without any success. So he left work early and made his way to the address.
Darren arrives home and makes a shocking discovery.
He found a scene of devastation, really. It looked like it had been ransacked. It looked like there'd maybe been a burglary. There was a lot of blood in the address, and he discovered Minxie's body.
And then he raised the alarm and the police were contacted.
As the police begin their investigation, they need to establish what Mingxie's last known movements were on the day of her murder.
Detectives will use a phrase sometimes that says if you find out how a person lived, then you'll find out how they died. It's about building up a detailed picture of that victim, because somewhere in there might just be the answer as to why this has happened and who's committed it. On the morning of the 17th of June, she'd gone and took her young son to the local primary school, which was a very short walk away, and returned to the address.
The killing was believed to have taken place in broad daylight, early in the morning after school, although the body wasn't discovered until Mr. Grundy raised the alarm.
The question is, who could possibly have wanted to harm Mingxie?
First thing that would go through my head is to try and establish exactly what has gone on.
The initial mystery for the police was that the house had been ransacked. There had been a burglary, and that possibly an intruder had killed Mingxie Yang.
News that a possible burglary has turned into a murder sends shockwaves across the local community.
There was fear and a sense of shock, because it's not something that happens with frequency in Lincoln at all. And the big fear is that our community is then under threat.
I remember hearing about it. My mum and my dad told me about it, and it was very upsetting. It's very traumatic knowing that it was basically on your front door. You know, you could go to sleep at night and something bad could happen. This could have been my mum, or this could have been my sister, or this could have been a relative that lived across the road.
Everybody was massively scared of what had happened because it was so close to home. It's 2 minutes away from the pub that I run. So that day, customers were coming in absolutely shocked and stunned with all the police cordons. It just is unheard of around here. You just can't believe that it's happened.
There was a genuine fear from people who lived in the local area that a burglar or intruder was at large and had carried out such a devastating crime in broad daylight. Neighbours were obviously concerned that this could possibly happen to them.
In the Lincoln suburb of Sincil-Bank, the community is shocked to hear of the murder of 29-year-old mum, Mingxie Yang, who has been beaten to death in her own home in what looks like a robbery gone wrong.
She was a local student. She'd got a child. We just couldn't believe that somebody like her had been killed.
And the fear on the streets is growing.
A lot of people were scared of living around here, knowing that something really bad's happened, and it's on your front door.
The first feeling is one of shock, and then wanting to know really what had happened. Was the public at risk?
When something like this happens in the community, there's a massive impact. There's lots of children and families in this area, so to have something so tragic and awful happening on your doorstep, it strikes fear throughout everybody.
That's all we were talking about. Everybody was just in utter disbelief that something like that could happen so close to home.
And a lot of them will have been friendly with Minxie Yang in any event, so apart from the personal impact, you really do get a build-up of tension throughout the community. People feel understandably frightened. Who's committed it? Why have they committed it? Are they going to come back and do it again? If it is a burglary, is our house going to be the next target?
With such a brutal murder happening on a busy street, police are taken aback at the boldness of the crime.
Mingxie had a young son who had been dropped off at school, and the killing was believed to have taken place sometime between about 9 and 10 a.m.
The fact that this has happened in broad daylight, at a time when people are taking their children to school, in a place like this, which appears quite peaceful and tranquil, is actually quite shocking.
The idea that an intruder had managed to get into this house unnoticed and carry out this killing was obviously very frightening for local people.
With the attack suspected to have occurred early in the day, police reach out to the locals for any potential information that may lead them to Mingzi's attacker.
You're really looking for witnesses. Something that's happened like that with so many injuries and so much devastation within the house would presumably have made some noise. You know, had she been screaming and shouting for help? Have the neighbours heard or seen anything?
In a case like this, in an area like this, the community are absolutely vital. They are the eyes and ears, and they're going to know things and see things that the police will never get to find out about. So it's really important to get out in amongst the community and make yourself visible and ask those important questions, because just by being here, you may be approached by a member of the public who tells you something that in isolation might seem quite minor, but actually, when you put it together as part of a jigsaw puzzle, it could actually help to solve the case.
Local reporter Richard Van Plu is also on the scene.
The first time I became aware of Mingzi's death was when the police put out a press release saying that the body of a woman had been found. Killings like this, obviously in rural areas, don't happen every day, and people are quite rightly shocked. And sometimes when you arrive at the scene, people will talk to you. It's their way of dealing with what's happened.
But so far, door-to-door inquiries have uncovered no leads to Mingzi's attacker. With the fear in the area growing, forensics arrived to examine the scene.
When I arrived at the scene, it was a shocking sight. Mingzi was face upwards and she was covered in blood. She was in the main living room. There was large, pooled, smeared blood staining on the carpet all around Mingzi's body. There was a white radiator near where Mingzi's body was found, and there was spots of blood spattered onto the white radiator. The smears and pools of blood along the carpet had indicated to me that she'd been assaulted at one end of the room, and she was on the floor crawling towards the kitchen in an attempt to escape. The blood spatters on the radiator and on the adjacent wall indicated that as she was crawling along, she was being hit with a blunt instrument repeatedly.
Post-mortem results then arrive, which further adds to the horrific nature of Mingzi's death.
A post-mortem found Mingzi's injuries were quite severe.
She had numerous injuries, more than 20 in total, mainly to her head. She also had, interestingly enough, some defence wounds, including a fracture to one of her hands, which clearly indicated that she'd been trying to fend the attacker off. But the actual number of injuries and the nature of those injuries were very, very severe and would only ever have resulted in one thing, which was her death. She'd basically been battered to death.
But as police scour the scene and surrounding areas, there is no sign of the murder weapon.
The weapon used was believed to be a very hard, heavy, blunt object. But interestingly enough, it wasn't recovered from the scene, which suggests that potentially the offender may have possibly brought it with them, but certainly taken it away with them, which does suggest a degree of premeditation and planning and the realisation, even in the moment of everything happening, that actually they might have left some evidence on that weapon.
Police start to suspect that their initial theory, that Mingzi disturbed a burglar who then attacked her, could be wrong. This is reinforced when detectives examine Mingzi's possessions.
Burglary is normally where somebody goes in and steals something. Sounds fairly obvious, but that's what happens. So if there were items in that house, such as TVs, electrical goods, jewellery, cash, you would expect someone that's committing a burglary to take those. The fact that items didn't appear to be missing is really important.
And new forensic evidence casts further doubt that Mingzi disturbed a burglary taking place.
The perpetrator had gone upstairs and opened a number of drawers, which made it look like a burglary. However, the intruder had done this after he'd assaulted Mingzi. We know that because Mingzi's blood was on the stairs in the form of footwear marks, and her blood was on the drawers in the form of finger marks, glove marks in blood. In my mind, your average burglar, if they're startled, they're just going to want to get out the property. They don't want to harm anybody, they just don't want to get caught. Why would a perpetrator repeatedly beat Mingzi and then take the risk of going upstairs to see if they could find something in her bedroom? It just didn't quite add up.
By re-examining the post-mortem results, police suspect this attack may actually have been carried out by someone closer to home.
The nature and the number of injuries and the fact that they were all caused to Mingzi's head area is a suggestion that perhaps this is a little bit more personal. It's almost like a humiliation and perhaps not just a stranger attack or a burglar that's been disturbed.
Considering the nature of Mingzi's injuries, the police would have to consider whether this was an argument that had gone wrong.
In the majority of murder cases, there is some kind of connection between the victim and the offender.
90% of murders are committed by people who know the victim, and normally very closely.
As police begin to suspect that Mingzi could have known her attacker and that whoever it was had a grudge against her, they look to her previous relationships, beginning with her ex-husband, 33-year-old Wai Hong Sang.
Police contacted Mr. Sang. He lived in the Grimsby area. He was a chemistry graduate with dual nationality, so he was a Brit as well as Chinese. He had gone through a recent divorce with Mingzi, and they shared a son together.
Police want to know where Sang was on the day his ex-wife was murdered.
Mr. Sang was asked to provide a written statement of his movements on the 17th. He disclosed to police that he had taken the day off work.
Sang's statement explains why he took the day off and outlines a clear alibi for the time Mingzi was murdered.
He had the day off work and he went to Sherwood Pines in the Nottingham area, where he went trail biking.
And he could provide car parking tickets and receipts to back this up.
With a solid alibi and evidence to prove it, Sang is discounted from the inquiries. So police shift their focus elsewhere, and to one person in particular.
The police, they would be examining who Mingzi had spoken to, who were the last people that had seen her. Obviously, in this case, Darren Grundy was virtually living at Mingzi Yang's address.
Darren Grundy would likely to have been the last person to see Mingzi Yang alive. He's the person who's in a current relationship with her. He's the person who discovered the body.
Mingzi Yang's fiancé, Darren Grundy, is taken in for questioning. And it isn't long before the police make an announcement.
Darren Grundy is arrested on suspicion of the murder of Mingzi Yang. He's taken into police custody, and the police think that they have their man.
All of Darren's clothing was seized and submitted to the laboratory for examination.
The police were convinced it obviously had the hallmarks of a crime of passion.
It's been 24 hours since the body of 29-year-old student Mingzi Yang was discovered at her home in the Lincoln suburb of Sincil Bank. And police have arrested her fiancé, 32-year-old Darren Grundy, on suspicion of murder.
Darren Grundy was the person that reported her death and was also possibly the last person to see her alive.
He was taken into police custody, during which time he's questioned and the police seek to gather further evidence and information to strengthen their case.
Police believe the attack on Mingzi was carried out by someone who knew her.
Police were convinced that this was a crime of passion. It's not unusual with crimes of passion that the victim is badly beaten. Mingzi had been beaten and sustained over 20 injuries.
The hallmarks of a crime of passion, I would say, are extreme violence, humiliation, degradation, that sort of thing. Doing something that's really personal So, destroying something that really means a lot to somebody. And often it is extreme, gratuitous violence where there's clearly been some kind of loss of self-control because it's such a personal issue.
Now in police custody, Darren faces intense questioning from detectives.
The interview of a murder suspect is different from the interview of a witness. It's far more detailed. The officers that interview a murder suspect will be specially trained, and they use tactics and techniques with the intention of getting as much information as possible. During the interviews, Darren Grundy maintains that he went to work that day and he was trying to get hold of Ming Xi Yang during the day. He couldn't get hold of her, so he decided to leave work early, and he came home from work early and he found her dead in the home.
But police aren't convinced by his account and detain him further.
In order to hold someone in custody for more than 36 hours, the police need to go to a magistrate's court in order to keep that person in custody. So this is a serious situation for Darren Grundy. He's in custody, and obviously the police think that they have their man.
When police receive forensic results from Darren Grundy's clothing, the findings change the course of the investigation.
When we looked at Darren's clothing in the laboratory, there was no blood spattering on there. The blood staining on him was quite minimal, and it's not what I would expect from the perpetrator. I would expect to find a lot of small spots of blood on the perpetrator's clothing, especially around his lower legs. If you imagine when Mingxi's moving around the room and she's being constantly struck, the blood is spattering onto that radiator. Those small spots of blood will also spatter back onto the assailant. Didn't see anything like that at all on Darren's clothing.
But then a member of the public comes forward with some information that turns the case on its head.
The Sincilbank area of Lincoln is a very tight-knit community, and following the news of Mingxi's death, the teenage boy who was in the Sincilbank area on the morning of Mingxi's murder did come forward. He reported to police that he had seen a cyclist loitering very closely to the back passage of Mingxi's address.
The young boy saw a man on the pedal cycle cycling around this area, and he actually saw him go into an alleyway, which is where the address in question is.
He remembered clearly that cyclist was wearing a blue workman's helmet rather than a cycling helmet. He made eye contact with the cyclist and then watched as he wheeled that bike into Mingxi's passageway.
But who was the cyclist? And could they be responsible for Mingxi's murder? The physical description the boy gives narrows down his identity.
This key witness reported to police the cyclist was also of East Asian appearance. The police now had to explore people who knew Mingxi matching that description.
And at this point, the police become aware that actually they've been looking at the wrong man. And they focus their inquiries in a different direction.
Darren Grundy is released without charge. And attention now falls on an individual from Mingxi's past.
The description of the cyclist matched Mingxi's ex-husband, Mr. Sang.
Wai Hong Sang had already provided police with a convincing alibi, saying he was over 40 miles from Mingxi's home on the day of her murder, enjoying a day out biking at Sherwood Pines Forest.
Mr. Sang has a solid alibi. He'd travelled to Sherwood Pines, where he had spent the day trail biking. So police are then tasked with establishing his movements exactly and whether it is possible that this cyclist could be Mr. Sang. In the eyes of the investigation, there is obviously a big difference between police suspecting that this cyclist may be Mr. Sang and may have committed the murder, but proving it to a jury is obviously a whole different matter.
In an attempt to track down the mysterious individual spotted by a local teenager, Police trawl through thousands of hours of CCTV from across Lincoln.
There are so many CCTV cameras now, private, local authority. People have them on their houses as well. It's a real critical part of any murder investigation. The police will be looking at trying to find that person at that location or as close as possible, and then trying to find where they went from there. Where did the cyclist come from? Ideally, what did they do whilst they were in the area, and then where did they go afterwards?
And after hours of rigorous detective work, police finally spot the cyclist.
What it actually showed was that this particular cyclist, who was quite distinctive in description, particularly with a hat that he was wearing, was picked up on 40 separate occasions in 16 different locations in and around the Lincoln City area. The route of the cyclist was quite clear from the footage that he'd come into the city in the early hours of the morning, then made his way out of the city again.
The man is seen cycling away from Lincoln just after 9 a.m., around 3 hours before Mingsi's body was discovered. Detectives analyse the footage to see if the cyclist in question is indeed Mingsi's ex-husband, Wai Hong Sang.
One of the main difficulties in proving identity of someone on CCTV is the quality of the footage. It's vastly improved since many years ago when it was really poor, but you still do have systems now, for one reason or another, that are not particularly clear. They're grainy. You may struggle to identify someone.
With the identity of the cyclist still unclear from the CCTV footage, police bring Sang in for questioning.
The police will be looking at his background, his movements, and his relationship, trying to gather as much information. They'll be looking at inconsistencies with his account, and it may be that he can't give certain information. So they'll be trying to build up a case against him using the factual information that they know and anything which can either confirm or disprove his account.
Under caution, Sang gives the same account he provided in his written statement.
Wei Sang told the police that he had gone to Sherwood Pines in Nottingham. He'd driven straight there from his home address in Grimsby, and he'd been there for the duration of the day. He was also able to produce some receipts from parking in the Nottingham area and a petrol receipt as well.
Despite Sang providing receipts to prove his alibi, police attempt to investigate his digital footprint by looking into his phone activity on the day.
He had turned his phone off when he left home, which he said was the usual thing that he would do when he was going trail biking.
So what the police decided to do instead was to examine the sat-nav on his car.
And what officers discover reveals a major hole in Sang's story.
The inbuilt car sat-nav actually showed that he hadn't gone directly from Grimsby to Nottingham, but he'd driven from Grimsby to Lincoln, where he'd parked in a lay-by for at least 2 hours, and then afterwards had then gone to Nottingham. So there was a huge hole in the alibi.
It's a shocking revelation. Police now know Sang was parked up in a lay-by on the outskirts of Lincoln on the day of Mingsi's murder. Could it be that Sang had cycled from this location to Mingsi's home in Sinsel Bank? Police look again at the CCTV of the suspicious cyclist.
The analysis of the cyclist on the CCTV showed quite clearly, with the times involved, that he would have had the opportunity to have parked his vehicle on the outskirts of Lincoln, cycled into Lincoln to Mingsi's address, killed Mingsi, and then cycled back out of the city again, back to his car, and then driven to Sherwood Pines in Nottingham, where he claimed that he'd been all day.
This key CCTV evidence proved Mr. Sang did have the time available to cycle into Lincoln and murder his ex-wife.
But the CCTV footage is still unable to prove if Wai Hong Sang was at Mingsi's home on the day of the murder. The only evidence police have is circumstantial, and unlikely to hold up in court. But then, forensic results from a search at Tsang's address returned from the lab.
The police submit various items for forensic examination from Wai Tsang. There were items which were actually purchased after he'd separated from Mingxi Yang.
We examined a number of items from him, including a watch. The watch, when you looked at it with a naked eye, it didn't look as though there was anything on it at all. So I think the watch had probably been cleaned. But in the laboratory, once we could look at it using a low-power microscope, we could manipulate the hinges, the links, and you could see that in between the links there were some small blood stains. Those samples of blood stains were then subject to DNA profiling tests, and the blood was attributable to Mingxi.
As well as the traces of Mingxi's blood found on her ex-husband's watch, further shocking evidence is found on a bicycle belonging to Tsang.
The bike that we examined was a different bicycle from the bike in the CCTV, but it was in the car on the day. The initial visual examination of that bicycle, we couldn't find any blood. But once we got it in the laboratory with specialised lighting and the low-power microscope, there was a small blood stain that was located on the handlebar. Again, that was subject to DNA profiling test, and that came back blood attributable to Mingxi. So, from my examination of these objects, it was obvious that he has tried to cover all of his tracks, and he has done so quite successfully because we've only found these two small blood stains. We examined many other items from that individual and didn't find anything on them. And he's obviously done a good job of covering his tracks, but these minute traces left in these difficult to locate areas is what indicated that he was the perpetrator.
Wai Hong Tsang is charged with the murder of his ex-wife, Mingxi Yang.
The police have circumstantial evidence. They have Wai Tsang in Lincoln, in the area at the time of the murder. They have the forensic evidence that links him as well. What they haven't got is a specific motive or a reason why he's committed this awful attack on his ex-wife.
Police obviously believed they had their man, but now they had to prove a motive. Why had Mr. Tsang chosen to kill his ex-wife?
"33-year-old Wai Hong Tsang has been charged with the murder of his ex-wife, 29-year-old Mingxi Yang, in the Sinselbank area of Lincoln. Having pleaded not guilty, the case is sent for trial.
Mr. Tsang's trial was heard at Lincoln Crown Court, which is a very old courtroom in the grounds of Lincoln Castle. It is all a wood panel building. The judge sits high above the courtroom in a wooden seat. The defendant sits opposite in the dock, and witnesses give evidence to his right. It is a very personal experience for everybody in the room.
As any officer involved in a murder case, you always will feel an amount of apprehension before a murder trial, because no matter how strong the case appears to be, and no matter how happy you are with how the investigation has gathered pace and been concluded at that point, there's always an opportunity and a chance that something could come up during the trial that could change the direction of things. And even if it is a technicality or something that doesn't directly impinge on the actual case itself, sometimes that can be something that influences a jury in a kind of negative way.
As the trial begins, local reporter Richard Van Plu observes Mingxi's alleged killer in the courtroom.
Tsang was very composed. He was obviously a very intelligent man and was following the proceedings intently, but showed little emotion.
The prosecution opens their case against Tsang.
The prosecution presented a strong case, backed by the CCTV evidence and the sat-nav evidence. But it wasn't an overwhelming case.
The prosecution in the case were looking to show that there was a degree of pre-planning and preparation in this case, the way that Wei Sang had behaved, the fact that he'd lied about where he'd been, that he came to Lincoln in his vehicle, then came on his pedal cycle into the city centre. The fact that there were so many injuries inflicted on Ming-Si Yang, it was clearly a personal attack, and it was clearly something that he'd planned, and he'd tried to cover his tracks very carefully.
The pathology evidence presented at trial showed that the injury that most likely killed Ming-Si was a brutal wound to the head. But the murder weapon was never recovered, and the prosecution suggested that this meant it was carried out by somebody with premeditation who had taken that weapon away and made sure that it wasn't found.
To the courtroom's surprise, Sang agrees to give evidence.
As a journalist in the courtroom, you sit in a wood-panelled seat right next to the witness box where Mr. Sang gave evidence. And confronted by the evidence from the sat-nav, Sang gave an account that he did leave his car in the lay-by near Lincoln. This differed from the account that he initially gave the police.
Sang agrees that yes, he did go to Lincoln, but rather than going into Lincoln City on a push bike, he said that he drove to the outskirts of Lincoln, he parked in a lay-by, and he slept for a couple of hours.
And the reason he gave for not telling the police this during his first account was that he didn't want his new partner to find out that he'd been sleeping.
The prosecution confronts Sang with the CCTV footage from the day of the murder. They are convinced this is Sang heading towards Sinsel Bank.
Sang was adamant that the cyclist in the blue work helmet was not him, and that he remained in his car asleep on the outskirts of Lincoln.
Wei Sang denies being the person on the pedal cycle. He simply says it's not him.
Despite the overwhelming forensic evidence against Sang, the court are yet to hear a motive behind the killing. But then, details of Ming-Si and Sang's marriage are revealed to the jury.
It's revealed that there was a history of coercion and abuse from Wei Sang against Ming-Si Yang. It's been going on for some time before they actually divorced. Domestic abuse, it's very rarely isolated. It's something that will often go on perhaps for years. I read a statistic recently that said that there were 50 incidents of domestic abuse that would normally occur before someone calls for help. And the victim will often put up with abuse or coercion for a long period of time before they eventually come to the point where they actually ask for help. Ming-Si Yang had actually reported previous incidents of domestic abuse to Humberside Police on 3 separate occasions before she moved to Lincoln, and actually before Darren Grundy had come onto the scene.
In 2012, Ming-Si divorced from Sang and moved to Lincoln to start a new life for herself. The pair then only saw each other when handing over their son to one another as part of an arrangement made by the court. The abuse that she had suffered appeared to have ended. But then, relations with her former husband took a sudden drop.
During the trial, it was established that the divorce between Ming-Si and Sang had not been straightforward. There had been some disagreements over the custody of their son. And obviously, that is something that can raise very high emotions.
Ming-Si and Sang had initially settled on shared custody of their son. But in the lead-up to that fateful morning, it appears Ming-Si had put in motion plans to end this.
They shared custody, but the prosecution put the motive on the basis that he got a letter a few days before where she wanted more custody of their son.
Wei Sang had received at least one letter in relation to those custody arrangements, so it's believed that actually Ming-Si Yang was looking to see more of her son, and Wei Sang wasn't happy with that, and this potentially was the reason why he killed her. In my experience, in a case involving children and personal relationships, it can be something on the face of it quite simple, and in isolation perhaps not as serious, that can send somebody over the edge, could potentially be a build-up of tension and stress over a period of time, and the person just kind of snaps.
In January 2015, the jury at Lincoln Crown Court returns its verdict. Wai Hong Zhang is found guilty of Mingzi Yang's murder. He is sentenced to a minimum of 28 years in prison.
At the end of the trial, the jury returned a guilty verdict on the charge of murder. They were obviously convinced by the prosecution case and returned an extremely quick verdict for a murder case. They took just 2 hours to find Zhang guilty.
Wai Zhang, I would say, was a cold-hearted individual, self-centred, deceitful, and clearly very violent.
But with his cleverly constructed alibi, initially deceiving police, was there a chance that Zhang could have walked away with murder?
This case stands out because the murderer prepared a very clever alibi before carrying out the killing. It is not unusual for people to try and create an alibi after they carry out a murder or a killing. But in my career as a crime reporter, there are probably only 2 or 3 other cases where someone has gone to such great lengths.
He's sat down and thought this through. He's obviously an intelligent person. He's covered his tracks. It just tells me that, yeah, he is that kind of cold, calculated kind of a person.
If it wasn't for the blood on the bike and the watch, although he is on the outskirts of Lincoln, it's not beyond reasonable doubt that a jury could have been convinced that he wasn't a cyclist.
The case really turned on the forensic evidence. You know, he may well have got away with that murder in years gone by, but fortunately with the advances in forensic science and the specialist CCTV that's available and the experts nowadays, he was quite rightly tracked down and sentenced.
If this murder had happened 30 years ago, at the start of my career, it's probably quite unlikely that he would have been convicted.
With Zhang now behind bars, the community reflects on the impact Mingzi's death has had on her family.
It's so traumatic. She was so young and she moved here, she wanted a better life, but she hasn't witnessed a whole life yet.
I think this case is shocking in terms of the level and the nature of the injuries. The sentence reflects the seriousness of the offence. Hopefully it may bring some small comfort to Mingzi's family moving forward. But at the end of the day, nothing will bring Mingzi Yang back, and it leaves a young boy growing up without his mother.
Shocking true crime Wednesday at 9 on Sky Mix, when a victim of circumstance is in the wrong place at the wrong time in You Murdered at First Sight.
She was a young woman who had a whole life ahead of her. Everybody was jittery, wondering what had happened to her.
Clearly a very dangerous person. This is the real whodunit.
Crimes don't really happen here. She'd been placed inside a suitcase. This was a brutal, horrific murder and an awful way to leave the body of a teenage girl.
I've been a criminal lawyer for over 30 years, and I've never dealt with a case like this before.
To have 3 trials is very rare, but the case was of such importance.
He would have walked free. And given what he had done before, we were in no doubt that he was a dangerous man.
Nestled in the southwest corner of Kent, the so-called Garden of England, this is the leafy, historic town of Royal Tunbridge Wells.
I would describe Tunbridge Wells as a safe family sort of location, wealthy and middle class.
There's a really low level of crime in the area. I feel very safe walking around at night.
People enjoy a very peaceful life on the whole and generally go about their business.
Tunbridge Wells is your archetypal Middle England. It's picturesque, it's surrounded by beautiful countryside. Crimes don't really happen here.
But that picture postcard image was about to be shattered. Kent police receive a call about a missing person, 17-year-old Terry Edmonds. The day before Easter Monday, Terry had arranged to meet her boyfriend, but she never showed up.
This was really out of character. She stayed in contact with her boyfriend regularly. She texted him on the hour almost, and he did the same back to her. They sent multiple texts to each other each day. So the fact that she did not text him was really unusual and set the alarm bells ringing.
Terry's boyfriend sent her 20 texts, but she never replied to any of them.
Her boyfriend got concerned, tried to phone her, didn't get any response, and then alerted her mum. And her mum then reported her missing to the police.
This disappearance was out of the ordinary for the happy-go-lucky teen.
She was bright and intelligent. She had 8 A-grade GCSEs. She was fiercely independent. She was a teenager who was turning into a young woman.
She decided to spread her wings, leaving home at just 16 to live in a housing association hostel in the centre of Tunbridge Wells.
She had aspirations to be a nurse. She was waiting to join college. She was too young to start training at that point to be a nurse. But from everything that we've heard, she was a caring, lovely, independent and headstrong, her mother said, but a young woman who had a whole life ahead of her.
She was very popular, lots of friends, was a girly girl. They described her as always liked to look nice, took care of herself.
But those friends were all equally puzzled at her disappearance, the only lead police have. She was 5 miles away in the town of Tonbridge when she last made contact.
She was in touch with her boyfriend, and she'd been to Tunbridge for the day, and she said, "I'm in Tunbridge Park, I'll be coming back soon." And then she didn't arrive back in Tunbridge Wells. So we started doing some searching in Tunbridge, because that's where she was last heard of.
So police cast their net wide, searching parks, old buildings, rivers, anywhere the missing teen could be. But the trail runs cold. With no other options, police appeal to the public and press for help. Her disappearance makes a big splash across the local media.
Tunbridge Wells is a place where crime doesn't normally happen. It's a tranquil place. So when a teenage girl goes missing, it becomes a news story. And Terry was just 17 years old. She had a mother, she had a boyfriend. So that's a story of local significance.
Terry going missing was really shocking for the people of Tunbridge Wells, and people were extremely worried. Everybody was jittery, wondering where she was and what had happened to her.
It's a closed community, people talk, so if there's something that does happen, then word does spread quite quickly.
It's 10 days since Terry went missing, and still no word from her. the family makes another desperate appeal to the public.
As time passed, we get more and more concerned when someone doesn't stay in contact. And what we were really more concerned about with this case was she'd not been in touch with her mum. Her mum would tell us that Terry always would respond to her. Even if it was a, I don't want to talk to you, she would get a response. So when that didn't happen, obviously the concerns were raised.
Concerns are also rising across her close-knit hometown of Tunbridge Wells.
I think as the days went by and Terry was missing, fear started to grow that something terrible had happened to her. And there was a big community effort. There were posters everywhere. The taxi drivers all carried flyers. And there was even an information point by police for two reasons. One, to gather information, and other reason to try and reassure people, because there was a lot of worry at that time.
In the meantime, police have been trawling through hours of CCTV footage close to where she was last seen, in the nearby town of Tonbridge. Suddenly, there's a breakthrough. Terry is spotted at Tonbridge railway station on the day of her disappearance.
When we checked the CCTV, we actually found that she had actually got on the train to go to Tunbridge Wells. And then checking the CCTV at Tunbridge Wells railway station, we found that she had got off the train at Tunbridge Wells. So at that point, the searching moved from Tunbridge to Tunbridge Wells.
The investigation suddenly picks up pace in the hunt to find the missing teen. Police now draw up a search plan using this new CCTV sighting.
The last sighting of Terry Edmonds was at Tunbridge Wells rail station, where she got off the train at 6:23. So she walked across here, and Terry was never seen again.
Investigators plan a search grid around this last known location. The hunt leads to the supermarket car park opposite the station. On the 12th day of Terry's disappearance, there are reports of frenzied police activity on wasteland next to the car park.
This area was absolutely cordoned off. There were police everywhere, police vehicles, so the public had absolutely no entry. They closed the car park off while forensics were working at the scene, so this was an absolute no-go area for the public.
The search teams had made a grim discovery.
The suitcase was discovered under a vehicle ramp going into the car park. And when the searching officers opened it, they found a young lady's body. She was in a fetal position in that suitcase.
This young woman appeared to have been mercilessly strangled.
She'd been placed inside a suitcase that had been well hidden behind a wall, a squalid, desolate and dirty spot to leave a young girl's body. This was a brutal, horrific murder.
When the suitcase was found with a body inside, I think it was the news that everyone had been dreading in a way. I think most of us had that sinking feeling that it was going to be Terry.
Police in Tunbridge Wells have been searching for missing teen Terry Edmonds. On the 12th day of her disappearance, they make a gruesome discovery under a car park ramp close to the station. The body of a teenage girl is found stuffed into a suitcase. She'd been strangled.
This was a brutal, horrific murder, a desperately tragic and awful way to leave the body of a teenage girl. The person who killed her had no sense of humanity, to leave a teenager in such a position.
The body in the suitcase was found behind a wall, just here. Immediately, police taped off the area, and there were lots and lots of police officers, forensic teams, sifting through the area looking for evidence.
Police are in no doubt that the body in the dark green suitcase is tragically Terry's.
We had to go through formal identification process, but we knew from the description that that was Terry in the suitcase.
The next day, the body is formally identified as Terry Edmonds. The news rocks the idyllic town of Tunbridge Wells.
To hear that she'd been murdered and her body found in such an awful way, stuffed into a suitcase, I think people were absolutely horrified and so sad.
Terry's disappearance quickly turned into a murder investigation, and that really sent shockwaves through the close-knit community of Tunbridge Wells. It scared people, primarily because she was a young teenage girl, but also because there are many parents in Tunbridge Wells who feared that there could be a killer on the loose.
To quell residents' fears, police presence is stepped up across the town. Investigators hit the streets, carrying out door-to-door inquiries for any leads on the killer.
Kent Police followed a lot of lines of inquiry. They had 50 police officers working on it. They were talking to quite a few people in relation to her disappearance and death.
The post-mortem reveals horrifying injuries to the young teen.
The details of the post-mortem were shocking, they were horrific. And as a seasoned journalist, it was upsetting. Terry had endured a really brutal and violent attack. She had been physically overpowered. She'd been raped, and she'd suffered a number of injuries. And her last moments would have been truly horrific.
The post-mortem examination showed that she had grazes on her back and she'd been strangled.
Terry was strangled by a scarf that she was wearing. She looped it through, and by pulling it tight, he'd strangled her. She had some facial injuries where she'd taken some strikes to the face as well.
And she was probably smothered with a pink sheet, which was found away from the scene.
Blood is found on this mysterious pink sheet, which is retrieved with Terry's trainers and her cigarette lighter in a pile of rubbish close to her body. They're sent off for analysis at the lab. But it's the suitcase that police hope could be the key to finding her killer.
Once the body had been removed, then the suitcase itself was considered as a crime scene. And that crime scene was essentially packaged up carefully and submitted to the Forensic Science Laboratory for examination.
Police hope testing for traces of DNA could provide answers to some of their biggest questions.
Initially, we were looking to see where the suitcase had come from. Could we have an owner of the suitcase? Could that be a big clue for us?
Whilst the lab pores over the suitcase, the spotlight falls on the person who raised the alarm. Terry's boyfriend. New evidence comes to light about a fallout with his girlfriend.
The last person that the police were initially aware of that had spoken to Terry was her boyfriend, and they'd had a row. Bearing in mind, most murders are committed by people that are known to the victim.
Samples of the boyfriend's DNA are also found on Terry's body.
Police investigating the disappearance of 17-year-old Terry Edmonds have today made an arrest.
Detectives arrest Terry's boyfriend at his home in the nearby village of Hadlow. He's taken in for questioning.
He was living with his mother in a house in Hadlow, and when he was arrested, police went to his property, uniformed officers were stationed outside, and forensic officers went into his house and conducted a search all night.
But eventually, this would draw a blank.
They did release him without charge because it was quite clear He was not involved in any way, shape or form. And it was clear he was at work, and there was no way that he was involved.
With the boyfriend eliminated, police focus on the suitcase. Forensic scientists have been putting their star piece of evidence under the microscope, and the suitcase has yielded a significant lead.
We recovered various samples, including a sample of DNA from the retractable handle. And the retractable handle had like a little switch on it. So we recovered material from that switch, and that DNA profile matched an individual that was of interest to the police investigation. That was a light bulb moment in the investigation, because we felt that, you know, that would lead investigatively to the identification of a suspect.
So police make a second arrest, and the man is brought in for questioning. It's a turning point for the investigation.
That suspect, in this case, turned out to be the previous owner of the suitcase. Now, that person then gave information to the police to say, that is my suitcase, but I gave that suitcase away. I believe, actually, it was given to the Salvation Army, so a charity donation.
As the police hit another brick wall, the clock's still ticking, and there's a brutal murderer on the run.
Clearly a dangerous person, clearly a very dangerous person, and trying to get them. This is the real whodunit.
So detectives have to go back to the drawing board, refocusing their efforts on the location where Terry was found. The car park. Through their inquiries, investigators discover it was often part of her regular journey through town.
And she used the car park as a short cut through, if you like, to make her way back to the hostel that she was staying at, that was just at the rear of the car park.
Though nothing on the police's CCTV trawl shows Terry's last suspected steps through it.
There was no CCTV in the car park itself, but there was CCTV at the exit, and she wasn't seen to leave. So we checked everything, double-checked it, triple-checked it. We couldn't see her leave.
Police can now prove Terry never left the car park, which means she must have been killed there. They double down their efforts to find out who else could have been using it on the Easter Monday evening she went missing.
We had to look wider, and we were looking at other people. And within the car park in Tunbridge Wells, there were some people that we called the rough sleepers. They were homeless people who'd found certain areas of the car park, stairwells of the car park, that they used as accommodation. And on those stairwells, certain people sleeping rough there on cardboard mattresses, sleeping bags, duvets, that kind of thing. We started looking at those people to see if there's anyone there was of interest to us. We made inquiries to the rough sleepers in the car park. Did any of them own a suitcase? And they all denied it.
But intelligence from an officer on the beat suggests otherwise.
A local police officer told us that he knew of one person who had a suitcase. And we looked through our records and we'd spoken to that person, he denied it. So there was a reason why he denied being the owner of a suitcase.
With their suspicions raised, detectives head straight back to the car park. They need to find the rough sleeper whose story doesn't quite stack up.
We then went and spoke to him again. He said he did have a suitcase, but someone had stolen it, and it was kept in the stairwell. Someone had emptied his clothes out from it, and the suitcase had gone.
But for investigators, something about his story doesn't seem right. So they arrest him. Perhaps this new suspect could blow the case wide open. In Tunbridge Wells, 17-year-old Terry Edmonds has been found dead. She was sexually assaulted and dumped inside a suitcase next to a car park. Police have made another arrest. A local homeless man has been brought in for questioning. 21-year-old Philip Bell.
He confirmed that the suitcase that Terry was in was the suitcase that he had previously owned. And we asked him more about it, but he insisted that the suitcase had been stolen.
Nevertheless, there were little glitches in his story that were starting to cause the police concern, and that's when they started to kind of zone in on him as a suspect.
Although police can find no evidence that their victim, Terry, knew Bell, they realise this isn't the first time he's had a brush with the law.
Philip Bell came to Tunbridge Wells from Salisbury, and he sort of set up a base in Tunbridge Wells.
He had left school at the age of 15 without any qualifications and had started living on the street. He got involved in petty crime. He became a drug dealer.
Philip Bell had been in Tunbridge Wells for about 2 years, living rough, and he was heavily into drugs, so cannabis, crack, speed, solvents. So he was a big drug taker and just drifting around, really.
And Bell's transient lifestyle puts him at the location where police believe Terry met her fate: the car park. Through their inquiries, police are told Bell had set up home on the landing of one of the disused stairwells. In the basement of that stairwell, forensic investigators find something sinister, with a link to Terry.
She had some dirt, some debris on her, inside her clothes, that was directly linked to the bottom of the stairwell. And at the bottom of that stairwell, her blood was found.
The fact that her blood, her being in that stairwell and injured was really important because it identified the attack site, essentially.
So police have found their murder scene. But during questioning, Bell denies he was ever in the stairwell or even the car park at the time when Terry disappeared.
He told them that he had nothing to do with Terry's murder and he hadn't even seen her.
However, when investigators seize his clothes, something raises their suspicions.
Having taken his trousers, they noticed that he had grazing on his knees, and that was consistent with him being astride Terry when he assaulted her and grazing his knees.
Now, he said he'd done that playing football. Now, we interviewed all the people that he used to play football with, and none of them ever remembered him actually falling down or hurting his knees whilst playing football in the time frame we were talking about. So again, that disproved part of what he was saying.
Although the case against Bell is beginning to build, the evidence is largely circumstantial. Detectives still don't have enough proof to charge their prime suspect with murder.
With there being no other evidence at that particular time, we had to release him on bail whilst we carried out other inquiries.
It's a blow for the investigation. Just days later, searching for answers about her daughter's death, Terry's mum once again makes an emotional public appeal.
I am begging you, please, if anybody knows anything, however little, get in touch, because anything to help catch the person that's done this will help.
Over the next months, detectives work 24/7 in the hope to get the potentially dangerous Philip Bell back behind bars. They doggedly trawl through hours and hours of the town's CCTV footage for anything that could link him to Terry's disappearance. Suddenly, something catches their eye.
It was some time later we were looking at more of the CCTV and we found Philip Bell. We'd found him walking past the railway station and going into the car park just a few seconds after we suspect Terry had gone in.
Although we never saw him and Terry together, it was clear from the timing that he followed her in moments after she went into the car park.
Police now have proof that their suspected killer and his victim would have crossed paths. And that's not all.
We then, about an hour later, we had CCTV of him leaving the car park. So that sort of brought us to a conclusion that she'd gone in, he'd gone in shortly afterwards, he'd come out, but she hadn't. So that added to our suspicions that he could have been responsible.
For the investigation team, this is really big. The new CCTV blows apart Bell's claim that he wasn't at the murder scene at the time of Terry's attack.
Initially, when Philip Bell was arrested and interviewed in May, he denied that he'd returned to the car park. Although there was no CCTV or eyewitness accounts from what happened within the car park, the CCTV was absolutely crucial because it demonstrated that Terry and Philip Bell were effectively on a collision course as they entered the car park.
Detectives also spot something strange about Bell's clothing as he leaves the car park.
When we suspect was the hour in which Terry was killed, he came out wearing a different pair of jeans. And we're able to identify that from CCTV because one pair was baggy and one pair was slim-fitting. So we were asking why had he changed that clothing?
Soon, investigators come up with a sinister theory.
Our theory was that he had got blood on his trousers, taken and disposed of those trousers, and changed them in that hour. Because why else? Why would you suddenly change your trousers halfway through the day?
Could this explain Bell's change of clothing? There was only one way to find out. Philip Bell is re-arrested and questioned by detectives once again.
He maintained that he was not in the car park around that time on that day. He was then shown the CCTV, which put him in the car park for an hour and him leaving that car park. And he admitted then that he had been in the car park that day, and he actually admitted that he'd been in, it was called the Lonely Staircase because there was no exit from it to any main part of the car park. It was where Terry was actually killed.
But Bell is adamant he never saw Terry or took part in her attack.
Philip Bell had said during that hour between him going to the car park and him coming out of the car park, he'd been in his sleeping area smoking quite a large amount of cannabis.
What he said was that he was, his words, stoned on cannabis, which was illegal. That's why he lied to the police about where he was.
During that lost hour Bell couldn't account for, he claimed to have smoked over 7 grams of cannabis. But evidence from a drug specialist would blow holes in his story.
We were able to disprove that through the use of a drug expert who was able to analyse the CCTV of him walking in and him walking out, and saying, walking out, he was not under the influence of cannabis, such as would have been the case if he'd consumed what he said he had.
It seems the suspect who claimed he was high was walking far too steady on his feet.
He couldn't be walking in that way if he was smoking a large amount of cannabis in a short period of time.
For the team's advisors at the Crown Prosecution Service, the case against Bell is beginning to stack up.
CCTV evidence was absolutely key in this case because it provided evidence to undermine Mr. Bell's initial account that he hadn't returned to the car park. And it also gave us evidence that he changed his clothing as well during what we called the lost hour between him entering the car park with Terry and then leaving the car park after he'd murdered her.
Meanwhile, the forensics lab also has exciting news. An item of Bell's clothing that was seized during his first arrest has also yielded a result.
In the CCTV of Philip Bell in Tunbridge Wells, he was wearing a very distinctive hooded top. It was a Fat Farm hoodie. And that hoodie was submitted to the laboratory for examination. And on it was a blood stain. It was a very small blood stain, about the size of a penny, that matched Terry Edmonds.
And the lab finds more evidence on Bell's belongings that were seized by police in the stairwell where he slept. On his sleeping bag, 2 large stains of blood. Through DNA testing, these are also confirmed as Terry's.
It was absolutely pivotal in the case because it demonstrated that there was a very clear link between Terry Edmonds, her being injured, and the belongings of Philip Bell and that stairwell.
To add to that, the pink sheet found near Terry's body, that's suspected of being used to smother her, throws up more clues in the forensics lab.
Not only did it have the blood of Terry Edmonds on it, but it also had a very partial footwear mark, and that footwear mark was matched to Philip Bell's training shoes. So collectively, and I suppose circumstantially, things were starting to build as a case against Philip Bell.
Is this the final nail in the coffin for the prime suspect? Forensic investigators find a semen stain on Terry's underwear. That's a partial DNA match to Philip Bell.
Today, a local man, Philip Bell, has been charged with the murder of Terry Edmonds.
With the evidence stacked against him, the 21-year-old homeless drug dealer is charged with the murder of Terry Edmonds. The news spreads through the town of Tunbridge Wells like wildfire.
It meant for the first time we could actually legally name him as the man in connection to Terry's murder.
When Philip Bell was charged, I think there was enormous relief that perhaps they had found Terry's killer. Before that, there had been a little bit of impatience from the public.
Next day, Bell appears at Sevenoaks Magistrates Court charged with Terry's killing. The scene is set for his trial at Crown Court just 3 months later.
So when there was this breakthrough and it was publicised, I think people felt finally Terry's killer will be brought to justice.
In Tunbridge Wells, 17-year-old Terry Edmonds has been found strangled and sexually assaulted, then stuffed inside a suitcase. With the evidence stacked against him, 21-year-old homeless man Philip Bell has been arrested and charged with her murder. He's spotted on CCTV following Terry into a car park, and his hoodie has a stain of blood belonging to his victim. Detectives have built up a chilling theory of how he carried out the attack.
He tried it on with her, she refused, and he then attacked her, killed her, and sexually assaulted her. But having done that, he was a homeless person with no car. He had no means to get rid of the body, but he had a suitcase. So he put the body in a fetal position in the suitcase.
A year after Terry's disappearance, Philip Bell's trial begins at Maidstone Crown Court. He pleads not guilty to her murder.
The thing that struck me about him was he was completely emotionless the whole time. You look into their eyes, and there was nothing there. It was quite chilling, actually.
But as the trial progresses, police realise convincing the court of Bell's guilt may not be an open and shut case.
The case against Bell relied entirely on circumstantial evidence. There was no smoking gun. There was no witness who saw him kill Terry Edmonds.
I think that Philip Bell also had a very good defence barrister who was able to just chip away at the little bits of evidence.
It became really a massive trial. I was given evidence for days on end.
And before long, Bell's defence team has a trick up their sleeve to try and raise doubts in the jury. They point the finger at another rough sleeper in the same car park, one of Bell's associates.
The man had a conviction for manslaughter. And because he lived in the car park, it was suggested by the defence that he was the murderer.
Not only that, but the defence's new suspect could undermine one of the team's key pieces of evidence, the footprint on the pink sheet used to smother Terry.
The man had a pair of Converse trainers found in his possession, which were linked to the pink sheet found at the scene, with a bloody footprint that matched that pair of trainers.
Following a dramatic trial lasting 6 weeks, the jury retires. After 22 hours spent deliberating, they failed to reach a verdict. For Kent Police and the prosecution team, their worst fears have come true.
All the evidence against Philip Bell, it seemed very strong. So it was very disappointing for Terry's mum not being able to get any justice, and for the rest of her family.
With no verdict reached by the jury, the judge orders a retrial. 7 months later, a second trial begins, and a brand new jury hears the case against Philip Bell.
But again, we had the same situation, with evidence being chipped away at by the defence team.
I was thinking, oh no, not again, because I was really concerned that it would be the same Groundhog Day kind of scenario.
This time, the defence focuses on Bell's hoodie. They claim there was an innocent explanation for Terry's blood on it.
They suggested that Philip Bell had brushed past the area where Terry's blood was and got it on his top. Again, I think that what they did was they raised a doubt about that, and the jury just couldn't be sure of it.
Following 19 hours of deliberation, the jury has news.
I think it's fair to say you could cut the atmosphere in that courtroom in Maidstone Crown Court with a knife.
Once again, a jury has failed to reach a verdict.
This is another massive blow for Terry Edmonds' family. They'd sat now through 2 lengthy trials.
There was, on my part, a real sense of shock and disappointment when the jury were unable to return a verdict, and then having to decide what we were going to do.
The team is on the verge of calling it quits.
Now, if we had done that, Bell would have walked free, and Terry's killer would never have been brought to justice.
But in a last-ditch effort to save the case, the prosecution tries for something rarely attempted in British legal history. A third trial of the same defendant.
And so we argue that it was in the interest of justice to go a third time, which is unusual.
It was the right thing to do. We had an overwhelming case, that Terry had been murdered by Philip Bell.
It's a close call, but the judge sides with the prosecution and agrees to keep Bell in custody until the retrial. So the team has one last chance to put Bell behind bars.
If the case fails, then he is going to walk free, and he could be dangerous.
So the prosecution goes back to basics. First, they tackle Bell's claim that he brushed past Terry's blood left on the stairwell. Forensic scientists run tests using the same small amount of blood that was found on Bell's hoodie. This tiny amount would have started drying if he'd touched it after the attack.
So you can see that if the blood has started to dry quite considerably, the stains start to break up. They're quite gritty, they're quite flaky.
But the stain on Bell's top seemed fresh, questioning his version of events.
The blood stain on the hooded top was not flaky, it was fresh-looking blood that had been transferred, so it demonstrated that it wasn't drying blood. So that blood must have transferred very quickly after it was available, which started to put Philip Bell being involved in the assault on Terry Edmonds and being exposed to her blood after she was injured.
Not only is the forensic evidence building better than before, this time the prosecution have also found a new star witness who has come forward to the police.
A 15-year-old girl came and gave her account about how she had been invited to go to the stairwell that Philip Bell was staying in.
And quite chillingly, she described what we believed had happened to Terry, her being straddled by him and being bruised by him and him trying to assault her. But very fortunately for her, somebody came and disturbed them and she was able to escape.
That was just exactly how we imagined that the attack had taken place on Terry.
And you could hear a pin drop. It was compelling evidence, and it showed in law that he had what we call a propensity to commit this type of offence.
As the prosecution's case seems to get stronger, Bell's testimony on the stand just falls apart. He admits being on the stairwell landing at the time of Terry's attack, but says he saw nothing.
He's within 10 feet of Terry being murdered, and yet sees and hears nothing. It was fanciful.
So a jury considers the evidence against Bell for a third time. Just 3 hours later, they announce their decision. Guilty.
It was a day of jubilation, really, for the family. There were loud shouts and cheers as the verdict was announced in Maidstone Crown Court.
There was an outpouring of pent-up emotion that had been there for a long period of time.
It was extremely satisfying when we were able to hear the guilty verdict and realise that we'd achieved some sort of justice for Terry's family.
Philip Bell is eventually sentenced to 28 years in jail.
He was evil. That's how the judge described him after the trial, and that is a fair description of him.
Justice is a consolation for the family, but it will never bring their beloved daughter back. Terry was a bright, intelligent girl, and she had a long life to look forward to that was cruelly taken away by Philip Bell, for no reason, really.
And the case has left its mark on the quiet Kent town of Tunbridge Wells.
I think Tunbridge Wells has never really got over the murder of Terry Edmonds, and I think the wounds are still there in Tunbridge Wells because Terry was part of our community and a lovely young woman. You could feel that fear and sadness that this had happened in our town.
The threat has resurfaced, placing the very thing everyone needs to survive under attack. It's a waterfall of bad news for Cobra in new cyber war on Sky Mix, Thursday at 9.
There'd been a fire in the Elizabeth Road area of Boston.
Police discovered a woman, early 30s, in a flat on her own, dead.
It was clearly a very violent, cold-blooded killing.
It was scary, not something you expect to happen on your doorstep.
The people of Boston feared that there was a killer at large.
We thought, is this to do with this gang-related thing? They'd just got her. They'd found out where she lived and got her.
In the heart of the Lincolnshire countryside is the thriving market town of Boston.
Boston's a town that's steeped in history. At one stage, it was the second largest port in the UK to Liverpool. You've got such things as the Guildwood Hall.
We've got a nice Boston stamp. This big church, which is very beautiful architecture. You can see from anywhere. If you get lost, just to look for a Boston stamp.
Because it's rural, you've got plenty of nice open spaces. And then you've got a town with local people in it, local trades.
It was a small village and it's a town. And they're very lovely people, very laid back.
They have a very Bostonian humour about them.
Anybody that comes past, it's always good morning. It's not like city life where they just ignore each other.
No, we'll be sat on the doorstep having a cup of tea. An old woman or someone comes past, you're like, all right, good morning.
Yeah, you don't know him from Adam, but you just say good morning.
Yeah.
With its surrounding farmland, Boston has long been a draw for those looking for work.
Boston is essentially the vegetable breadbasket of the United Kingdom. About a third of the fresh fruit and vegetable comes from that area in the whole of the UK.
Farmers need, packhouses need X amount of casual labour. Boston doesn't hold that amount of casual labour, so that labour has to come in from elsewhere. And that's always been the case all the way back.
In recent years, the town has been transformed by the arrival of workers from across Europe.
Boston's changed incredibly over the last 20 years with the migration from the European Union. It's had the highest amount of migration for anywhere in the country. The first wave came from Portugal, but gradually as more Eastern European countries came into the EU, it was predominantly Baltic states, Lithuania, Latvia, and then Poland, and latterly Bulgaria and Romania.
Many European people here. There's lots of factory and field work, jobs around, many cabbages. That's where you got sprouts for Christmas. So we are not that bad.
33-year-old Marina Urte moved to Boston in 2007 to start a new life for herself.
Marina came from Latvia. She found work at a fruit packaging plant, and I think she was fairly popular there and well-liked.
She was more crazier than me. No, she was a lovely girl. She was beautiful, quite popular. When she started her work, she'd been offered higher position than other people. She was like a leader.
She was known as being quite frank and quite honest, but also a hard worker.
She wants jobs done right. She would tell you where to go, what to do and how to do. And if obviously somebody was doing something wrong, she wouldn't be quiet. Quite perfectionist.
We were working together in the same factories, and we would go out partying sometimes, but I would say most of our time we would spend at the job. Me and Marina, we were similar in terms of career progression and temperament and wanting to improve, earn more money and create more comfortable life for us.
Marina had settled into Boston, and with a steady job and a new group of friends, she met 33-year-old Gytis Griskavikas.
She met Gytis in 2009. He came from Lithuania.
He used to work with us at the factory as well. He was a very nice, intelligent guy, very friendly, very caring. And I just remember that he turned up at our door, taking her out somewhere. They were really happy, they were really in love.
And they married quite quickly, I think, in 2010.
They have a nice wedding, and she have a nice dress, and it was like a fairy tale, like a big love story. They loved each other, and they was really in love and happy.
He was flying, and he had all the sparks in his eyes, and Marina, so yeah, they were in love.
And it wasn't long before Marina and Gytis decided to start a family together. In November 2010, Marina gave birth to their baby daughter.
She was very good mommy. She adored her little girl. She was always calling her little princess, always.
Gytis, likewise, was also a good husband and a good dad. They were a normal, happy family.
Sadly, the relationship between Marina and Gytis didn't last. But they both agreed to raise their daughter together whilst living separately. And as Marina continued to impress at her job, she began to think big for her future.
She was always taking care of flowers, and she always dreamed to have some little shop with many different kinds, and she would sell them for special occasions like weddings or big birthdays.
But in the summer of 2016, everything changes when one of Marina's neighbours calls an emergency engineer believing there's been a gas leak.
The next door neighbour smelt something under her stairs.
But when the engineer arrives, he suspects the smell is coming from Marina's flat and looks through her letterbox. They spot a smouldering fire and call the fire brigade immediately.
Fire rescue.
Oh, hello. I've been called to the downstairs flat, but we can smell smoke from upstairs, and there's fire damage to the stairs.
Right, okay.
I remember learning there'd been a fire in the Elizabeth Road area of Boston. I don't think there was any obvious sign of a fire from outside, but certainly the neighbours were aware that it had been a fire.
The lady from downstairs thinks there'll be somebody inside upstairs, but we can't get up the stairs because they're too damaged.
Okay, we have got fire crews on the way to it, okay.
Firefighters force their way into the flat and put out the smouldering fire, whilst checking if anyone is home. At first it appears empty, but as the crew enter the bathroom, they make a shocking discovery.
They find a woman, early 30s, in a flat on her own, dead, obviously by strange circumstances, in a bath, no water in the bath, covered in soot, with a hose on top of her. You know, you think, good gracious, you know, how on earth has this happened?
Police are immediately called to the scene.
I want to know what the cause of death is roughly at that stage. So is it a homicide? Is it suspicious? I mean, just because a body's been found in the bath doesn't necessarily mean it's suspicious. It could have been an accidental fire or something like that.
Police quickly established that the dead woman is Marina Urte. It becomes obvious she has been brutally attacked, with horrific injuries to her face and body. A murder investigation is immediately launched and officers secure the scene.
It's all about scene preservation. The scene can tell you a phenomenal amount, and the last thing that you need is that scene corrupting.
News of Marina's death quickly spreads through the street.
We all gets moved out of the flat, and then next hour or so, turns out she's been murdered in a battle. We never, ever thought for a second that there was a murder. We just generally thought there was a fire. Not something you expect to happen on your doorstep. It's just crazy.
In the quaint market town of Boston, Lincolnshire, the usual tranquility has been disturbed by the sirens of fire engines, and neighbours on Elizabeth Road are stunned to learn that not only was the fire set deliberately, but that 33-year-old Marina Urte has been brutally murdered.
The residents were shocked to learn that it was a murder because initially, like everyone else, they thought it was a fire.
Everybody was in shock. You just didn't know how to get your head around it.
There was always a police car parked just there on the side.
Constant flashes, weren't
Yeah,
there?
yeah.
Forensic cameras, it was just unreal, wasn't it?
It's just not what we expected at all.
It is a quiet area, so for something like this just happened, like, I think it did shake everybody up, to be honest.
When a crime like that hits Boston, it's very painful to hear. Some Bostonian people, they do feel afraid, they feel afraid going out. It just brings this grey shadow over your community.
As Marina has been senselessly attacked in her home for no apparent reason, the community is on high alert.
The people of Boston feared that there was a killer at large.
It was scary. There was always that worry of somebody coming back. They could have potentially took more lives.
It isn't long before Marina's family and friends learn of the brutal attack on their loved one.
Someone texted me saying that The fire brigade and police is there, so she's been killed.
I was in shock. I couldn't believe. It was my birthday, so obviously from very high happiness I went in deep sadness and proper shock. I thought, what? Is that really possible?
With a murder investigation underway, police need to establish a timeline of Marina's last known movements.
There's all sorts of inquiries that need to be made. We would have people immediately looking for CCTV in the area. We'd have people very, very quickly knocking on doors to find out who's been seen in the area, who hasn't. We need to find out when this happened, because that's the starting point, isn't it? When was she last seen, and who was she last seen by? Also, where she worked, who she would normally work with, when should she have been in at work last?
Officers speak to Marina's colleagues at the fruit packing factory where she worked and narrow the time frame on her last known movements.
Police discovered Marina hadn't turned in for work 5 o'clock that morning. So clearly, whatever had happened before that time. And that's absolutely key part of the investigation.
Back at the scene, police and fire experts examine the cause of the fire and quickly establish it had been purposely set after Marina had died.
The early forensic evidence showed that a fire had been set in the flat, but it didn't take properly, so the house wasn't badly damaged by fire.
The fire didn't really take, I think it was just slow burning. But if they'd done a good job on the fire, it could have just took this whole block. That was scary.
With the fire having been set after the attack, detectives speculate whether Marina's killer had tried to destroy evidence at the scene.
They won't have known if they left any forensic evidence there. They won't have known if they left any fingerprints there. They won't have known for sure that someone didn't see them either going or coming back.
Forensic experts are called in. They need to examine the scene to find any clues that might point to Marina's attacker.
When we got there, it was obvious that I wasn't able to do my job. The reason I couldn't do it is because the fire that was started on the stairs had produced an excessive amount of soot throughout the flat. And the whole flat was covered in a thin layer of soot, which meant you couldn't see the blood. So at that point, after a brief look around, and we did locate some bloodstains, but it was obvious that the extent of that was much more than what we could see. We decided to go home and have a team of people come in and de-soot the scene, and then us to go back after that process has been done.
Forensics must wait until the thick layer of soot is meticulously cleared before they can work. But detectives do manage to question Marina's ex-husband, Gitas. He says he hasn't seen her, but reveals some information which leads investigators to look deeper into Marina's personal life. And they uncover some disturbing connections to some violent people.
Following the ending of a relationship with Gitas in 2015, she'd formed a new relationship. And it was quickly discovered that she had been involved in a very recent trial at Lincoln Crown Court. She had been charged with perverting the course of justice after her new partner was involved in a violent attack on another group of East Europeans.
The man in question is 42-year-old Alexandra Kudryasov.
Alexander, he worked at the same factory as well. Alexander was involved in what's it called, criminal activity and deviant behaviours and everything. He's got quite a rough background.
Police found out that a new boyfriend had recently been sent to prison for 18 years for grievous bodily harm, dreadful attacking involving knives. And Marina herself had been acquitted for conspiracy to pervert the course of justice in providing him with an alibi. Only a matter of days before her body was found. Clearly, it was an obvious line of inquiry that her death might be something to do with those circumstances.
Police want to know, was Marina's involvement in a gang dispute anything to do with her death? Could this have been a revenge attack?
One theory that the police would have been exploring is that maybe one members of the group that were the victims would exact revenge on Marina's partner, and the fact that he had been convicted and was now out of the way meant that, of course, there was no one to protect Marina at the time.
Police explore the possibility Marina had become mixed up with a bad crowd through her relationship with Alexander. The theory of a revenge attack takes hold, and the safety of Marina's friends and family becomes a police priority.
The fact that a group of East European men have been very, very badly injured by another group of East European men, obviously down in Boston, there would have been tensions between the various people involved, the various families.
Clearly, one of the concerns for the police initially was the welfare of the child, and then the other family members as well.
As police make sure Marina's loved ones are kept safe, post-mortem results arrive which offer clues to her attacker.
Marina had suffered traumatic brain injury, and she had fractured eye sockets and other injuries.
We know that it wasn't a knife used. It could have been done with fists, kicking, or a blunt instrument.
It was clearly a very violent and cold-blooded killing.
And with the scene now cleared of soot from the fire, forensic results arrive, which further paints a horrific picture.
What we found was a large pool of blood in the living room with smears around it, and there were small spots of blood radiating from it, indicating that there's been impacts in that area, probably into Marina herself. I suspect that she's gone into the living room for whatever reason, been hit, gone down almost straight away, and then been assaulted on the floor by punching or kicking or with a blunt instrument.
Forensic results also show bloody track marks from the living room to the bathroom.
The two track marks is where her heels were in contact with the ground as she's been dragged across the landing and into the bathroom. In the bathroom, there were spatters of blood around the bath and on the floor to indicate that she'd been further assaulted in that area. Her body was found naked in the bath. There was no blood-stained clothing, so when it happened, she was most likely naked. And the pathologist said that Maria had actually been drowned by having the shower head forced into her mouth, and it was that one which actually killed her in the end, was the cause of death.
But who could have carried out such an horrific attack? Had Marina become sucked into a gangland dispute and paid the ultimate price for it?
We'd heard that she had gone to court to do with this gang-related thing.
Yeah.
We thought she'd just got her. They'd found out where she lived and got her.
In the Lincolnshire town of Boston, police are investigating the murder of 33-year-old Marina Urte, who was found in her own home, beaten and drowned in the bath. Her boyfriend, Alexandra Kudryasov, is in prison, serving an 18-year sentence for a vicious attack during a gangland dispute. Whilst he is ruled out as a suspect, there are suspicions that Marina has been murdered in a gangland revenge attack.
After it happened, we used to see this really spruced up black car coming past. We kept thinking, oh, is this to do with, like, this gang-related thing? That's pretty much everybody's first thoughts, wasn't it?
But police are keeping an open mind.
It's the age-old adage, ABC of investigating. Accept nothing, believe no one, and check absolutely everything. If it was anything to do with the grievous bodily harm trial, and Marina being acquitted of conspiracy, and almost a revenge attack by perhaps those people that had been the victims in the first place. One would expect it to be almost tit for tat. Revenge is usually about, I'm going to give you what you gave to me. That's what revenge is. Revenge doesn't normally extend to attacking a defenseless woman in her own home, viciously and violently over a prolonged period of time. That, to me, was not a revenge attack.
Police also suspect that the lack of a forced entry points to a different explanation.
That immediately means to me, this is personal. That would be my first thought there. This is not a random attack. This isn't a burglary gone wrong or anything like that. This is personal, for some reason or other. Whoever did this to Marina knew her, and Marina knew them and had let them in the house.
With this latest theory, police look closely at Marina's inner circle.
One of the key elements is always to find out who saw the victim alive last.
Police would have been looking to question those who were closely connected to Marina. That would have been her former partner and her former husband, also her sister who lived nearby. As every police officer knows, most murders are committed by people known to the victim, so it would have been their primary avenue of inquiry.
As Marina and her ex-husband Gitis had shared custody of their daughter, police question him about the last time he saw her.
Under questioning, Gitis did disclose his movements on the night and day before the murder. He disclosed that he'd been celebrating his birthday.
He immediately said, yeah, Marina had come to his house. They'd then gone to a supermarket and bought some whiskey, and then gone back to her flat.
This would have been late in the evening into the early hours of the next day. And he said that he left Marina's flat at 2 o'clock in the morning, and that when he left, she was fine.
They had a pleasant evening. They'd had a few drinks, but there was nothing else. He was saying, it's not me.
With Gitis admitting to being with Marina on the night of the murder, but claiming to have left on good terms at 2 a.m., investigators have little else to link him to the murder.
That he'd said that he'd been at the flat the night before. That poses actually an interesting dilemma for a senior investigating officer. Is what do you do with that? It's only suspicion. There is no hard evidence. You are hoping you're going to find some hard evidence through maybe forensic examination of the scene, CCTV, or anything like that. But that takes a long time.
Even without evidence against Gitis, police need to act fast in case he is in any way connected to the crime.
As the senior investigating officer, it's your decision whether to arrest a suspect, and not only whether to arrest a suspect at that time, when you do it and under what circumstances. The senior investigating officer in this case took the view that it was the most advantageous way for the investigation was to make an early arrest.
Gitis Griskevicius is arrested on suspicion of the murder of his ex-wife Marina.
It won't have been an easy decision. There would have been a train of thought undoubtedly about, well, there's no evidence here that he's involved. There will have been opinions within senior officers, probably more senior than the SIO in this case, that he shouldn't have been arrested. We would know that we'd only be able to keep him in custody a maximum of 24 hours, and if no evidence came forward during that period of time, he'd have to be released. So it's not a straightforward decision.
With the time ticking against them, police further question Gitis under caution.
He gave the same story as he'd done before he'd been arrested, that he'd been there with Marina voluntarily, he'd left around 2 o'clock in the morning, and she was fine when he left her.
But with Gitis now in custody, police can delve deeper into his life to find any evidence that might connect him to Marina's murder.
Once we arrest him, the purpose of that is to enable the police to search the house, search his vehicle, search him, examine him for any injuries.
On closer examination, officers notice an injury on Gitis's right hand, which he explains was caused by an accident. Despite the suspicious injury and Gitis being the last known person to see Marina alive, the police have no further evidence. And Gitis has been in custody for almost 24 hours.
One has to make a decision. Have we got enough evidence here to charge him? Clearly they hadn't.
Gitis is released on bail.
The news obviously left question marks for people in the area. Was this the man? Had they caught the killer? Or was the perpetrator still at large?
Police now move their focus away from Gitis and cast the net wider. They trawl through hours of CCTV across the local area in hopes to find anything that might lead them to Marina's killer.
They would have trawled hundreds of hours of CCTV.
CCTV examination is an art form. It isn't just a straightforward process. It can take weeks and weeks and weeks to do it methodically. Some of the bigger police forces these days have dedicated teams whose sole job it is to do that.
And after hours of examination, police find footage from the early hours of the 20th of May, the day Marina was thought to have been murdered. And it places Gitis back in the frame.
They managed to find him on CCTV.
The footage shows Gitis running towards Marina's house at 9:30 p.m. Rather than he had claimed, heading there with Marina after a party at his. Then, 2 hours later at 11:30 p.m, Marina and Gitis are seen together at a nearby supermarket. And then, crucially, he is caught on camera returning to his house much later than 2 a.m, the time he told police.
So he had not left Marina's home at 2 o'clock in the morning and gone straight home. He was seen around 7:30 in the morning, and I believe he got back to his own premises around about 8 o'clock in the morning. So straight away they know he wasn't where he said he was, when he said he was there. The story he gave from the outset was a pack of lies.
The CCTV footage disproves Gitis' story and places him near to the scene on the morning of the murder. But the police still need more evidence to strengthen their case.
The police would then start thinking, well, how can we bolster this circumstantial evidence?
The police then begin to find other pieces of evidence that link him to the murder. A pair of his shorts were found in his washing machine, which he was seen to be wearing on CCTV.
And lo and behold, no blood was found on the shorts or anything like that. But the police would then say, well, where's the hoodie that he was wearing? Where's the T-shirt that he was wearing? Where's his footwear? Where are his socks? None of which was ever found. The fact that he couldn't account for that, again, just adds to the circumstantial evidence.
Gitis' phone is seized and searched, which raises further suspicion.
They found he had inadvertently wiped all the data off his phone.
The police believe Gitis deliberately wiped his phone to hide incriminating messages. But with the only evidence being circumstantial, and forensic results from the scene showing no strong link to Gitis being the killer, will it be enough to charge him for murder? Or will the theory of a gang-related revenge attack for the crimes of her boyfriend hold the truth to the killing? Lincolnshire police are investigating the murder of 33-year-old mum Marina Ertey. And although they have circumstantial evidence that links her ex-husband Gitis Grickevičius to the crime, they are lacking forensic evidence. Meanwhile, her new boyfriend is serving 18 years in prison for a violent assault on a rival gang, and there's a theory Marina could have been killed in a revenge attack. Then the police make an announcement. The Crown Prosecution Service has decided to send the case to trial. And it's Gytis they believe is the killer.
Following the CCTV and other pieces of evidence, Gytis was rearrested and charged with the murder.
Gytis pleads not guilty. And with the evidence being mainly circumstantial, the police have their work cut out to prove there is enough to convict him.
Certainly the lead up to a trial for murder involves a phenomenal amount of work. Making sure the evidence is presented in the correct fashion, making sure witnesses turn up. My feeling at the beginning of every murder trial I've been involved in was a fear of being perceived to have let the victim and the victim's family down. They are completely beholding upon you as an individual to bring some justice for their loved one.
In March 2017, the trial into Marina's murder begins at Lincoln Crown Court. And as Marina's friends and family enter the courtroom, they come face to face with her alleged killer.
When I came in, he looked at me with the eyes full of almost tears, and he looked at me as if I didn't do it.
As the trial begins, Marina's close friends reveal to the court details of her relationship with Gytis.
I remember she came to me when she was already heavily pregnant, and she was complaining that she's put on so much weight and Gytis is not happy anymore because she's not in the same shape as before. So I did notice that something was off. Why would you judge your wife for being a bit overweight when she's carrying your child?
And as time went by, the relationship continued to break down.
Then Gytis stopped investing into the family, doing anything around the house. And she would work and she would take all overtimes. So sometimes she would go weeks without a day off. And she would mention to him, maybe you should work more, or maybe you should at least wash the dishes. Then he would turn it back on her and humiliate her in terms of the weight or how she looks.
Marina then began to consider a life away from her husband.
She said to me that she wants a real man who'd take care of her and she would feel loved and cared for.
And in 2015, Marina broke off the relationship. And it wasn't long before she met her new partner, Alexander.
Marina was very happy. She said that I finally feel like a woman and I finally feel like I've been cared for. He gave me a perfume, and she said that over all these years with Gytis, he never gave her anything like that. She felt so much appreciated.
And friends revealed to the court that Gytis did not take Marina's new relationship well.
Paskevicius was still besotted with Marina. They'd split acrimoniously, but he still harboured a desire to get back with her. And he hated the fact that she was now with someone else.
He was described as being very jealous about the new boyfriend.
I met with him a few times on the street, and he said, how could she leave him? Because he's so good in bed. So he was not even thinking about the quality of life. He was raging about if his size is larger than his, how could she swap me for someone else?
But when Marina was arrested for perverting the course of justice, Gytis decides to use their daughter as leverage to get her back.
When police come up and arrested her, she didn't have a passport, she lost the job, and she didn't have a place to live. She lost everything, and in that moment, he got the girl.
She was praying and hoping that everything's gonna work out so she could then finally reunite with her daughter.
When she was fully acquitted of any wrongdoing, Marina asked to be reunited with her daughter, but Gytis refused.
I told him that you probably ought to allow Marina see the child, at least under the supervision of social workers in the children's center once a week for a few hours. She's probably missing her mother, and he was absolutely reluctant to do that, and he mentioned that we don't even mention mother's name in the house. Her girl was not allowed to pronounce her name in front of him.
He was sending her nasty messages about the girl, like no money, no honey, asking for money. Then he was taking girl out from the country, which she supposed not to do, and then posting in a Facebook saying, oh, hello, we are here. That was very nasty.
And things only got worse for Marina.
Marina had made all sorts of complaints against Griskevicius. She couldn't prove any of them. I think her vehicle had been damaged, she'd had a pedal bike stolen. She didn't know that it was him for sure, but she thought it really was, and it frightened her. There were a couple of occasions when she went to the police because he was seen filming her on his mobile phone, arriving at her house unannounced, and it spooked her to such an extent she went to the police.
I think Marina had confided in certain friends that she was worried that Gytis was stalking her.
She rings me one day, she says, he was standing on the corner of the street looking at the house.
However, in the last few days of Marina's life, hers and Gytis' relationship seemed to rekindle.
They restarted the communication. She rang me and she was so happy to say, oh, you don't know what just happened. I will see the child soon and he's talking to me in a nice way. And she was willing to resolve the conflict for her, for the daughter, and for him, for Gytis even. Just before the day, she rang me and she was very excited. And he said that he loves me and he wants to get back. He's the father of my child. Maybe I should, maybe I shouldn't. And he wants to come over. He wants to celebrate his birthday with me. And I did tell her, do not meet him on your own.
Griskevicius was still besotted with Marina. I think he saw an opportunity there to say, right, I'm the father of your child. This is my birthday. Let's celebrate together, give it another go, and rekindle our marriage.
Back in the courtroom, it appears with only circumstantial evidence, Gytis could still walk free. But then a new witness takes to the stand and flips the case on its head.
This individual contacted the police and said, this guy admitted to me what he'd done. He admitted to me that he'd murdered Marina, and then he admitted that he'd set fire to the premises. And I'm prepared to give evidence to that effect.
After a grueling 2-week trial at Lincoln Crown Court, the jury returns its verdict. Gytis Griskevicius is found guilty of Marina Urte's murder. He is sentenced to life with a minimum of 23 years in prison.
The guy came and gave his evidence, and obviously the jury took it on board, and ultimately, with that and with all the circumstantial evidence, unanimously convicted him of murder. He's got to spend 23 years in jail before he even becomes eligible for parole. That's a long time by anyone's book. But you know, he committed one of the most horrific crimes you could imagine. On a defenseless mother of his own child, my view is that he deserves every one of those 23 years.
But why did Gytis decide to kill Marina? On that fateful night on the 20th of May 2016.
I think was about the fact that she was shunning his advances. Even though her new boyfriend was going to be in prison for 18 years, she still wanted to stick by him. He couldn't bear the thought of that. And I think he thought, well, if I can't have you, no one else can.
I think Gytis was jealous and had been humiliated by the new relationship, and that was his motive for the murder.
He'd taken the poor woman, battered and beaten, from one part of the flat to another, where he attacked her again, bundled her into a bath, and then drowned her with a hose. I mean, how callous and calculating can you get?
And for Marina's neighbours, her killing still haunts them to this day.
I always get the question, did you not hear anything? I'm like, no, I didn't. I'm like, so wish I did. It was in my mind for a very long time, thinking, why the hell could I not just hear anything? And then maybe we could have given her some hope. No matter how much danger I'd be in, I would have busted through the door and tried to help. 100%. If I'd have heard anything, I'd have gone straight in there and tried to help her. Even though I'd be putting myself at danger, I'd still help her, because nobody deserves to lose life like that.
And for Marina's friends and family, with the case behind them, they are slowly coming to terms with a life without her.
The biggest thing I miss about Marina is her liveliness. She was very, very positive girl, full with ideas, full with life.
I miss everything about her because I don't have anyone similar to her. She was a very good friend, and in my difficult situations, when I'm so upset and I'm so down, I know that she would be the person to turn to. She would just tell me, everything's gonna be all right. Don't worry about anything. Everything's gonna be perfect. And she had so much power in these words that I would straight away feel better. Yeah.
Stranger danger is rare but not impossible. The chilling Murdered at First Sight is new Wednesday at 9 on Sky Mix.
Please, how can I help?
There was a 999 call received from dog walkers that had found a suitcase on a lay-by just near the road.
People came across a suitcase and opened it, and inside was the remains of a person.
Local people found it extraordinary that such an incident could happen here.
For a murder to happen, not only a murder, but a murder on this scale, it was absolutely shocking for the community.
We had knowledge that he had over £270,000 worth of debt, and he was struggling to pay off those debts.
There was blood absolutely everywhere in that room, on the sofa, on the walls and on the ceiling.
Through extreme measures, he used the alternative of planning the murder of his friend.
Tintwistle is an idyllic village nestled on the edge of the Peak District.
Tintwistle is a typical Peak District village. It's got a mixture of beautiful stone cottages. It's on the banks of the Longdendale Valley, and behind it are the Tintwistle Moors, known as the Nar and the Lower Moor. And it has stunning views over the Longdendale Valley and the 5 reservoirs.
A very parochial village where people can leave your back door open, no problems.
In Tintwistle, everyone knows each other. It's a very, neighbourly feel. It's a very close-knit community.
We've got a lot of people who have a lot of very good neighbours, and I think everybody supports each other.
In terms of crime rates in Tintwistle, it's fairly, non-existent.
But all this is about to change when the peace is shattered early one morning.
On the 10th of October, there was a 999 call received from dog walkers that had found a suitcase on a lay-by just near the road.
The location was on a main road that went between Manchester and Sheffield, and it dipped down a little bit into Derbyshire. It was a car park off the main road, but it was an area that was quite popular for walkers.
As you come into Tintwistle from the east, you go along what's called the Woodhead Pass, and this particular suitcase was dumped just over the wall as you go into the village beside the first reservoir.
As I remember, like this people passing by this lay-by and came across a suitcase and opened it, and inside the suitcase was the remains of a person.
Police are immediately dispatched to the area.
There's quite a long drive, really, from the point where I got the call to the point where I arrived at the scene. Just to give you some idea around the geography, when I first got the call, I was in Derby, which is here. The deposition site was all the way to the north of the county, to the north of Derbyshire, and as you can see, it's right at the very tip of the county.
Upon arrival, they are met with a gruesome sight.
It looks like the suitcase has been set on fire, and inside that suitcase we have a body of a man whose head has been removed, whose arms have been removed, and whose feet have been removed.
It was a Samsonite suitcase that was in an extremely charred state. But then it became apparent, and we had a human torso that had been extremely cruelly dismembered and burnt.
As a crime, this is really, really vicious. For somebody to remove all the limbs of a body, never mind commit the murder itself.
Derbyshire Constabulary launch a murder investigation, and news of the horrific find soon spreads around the village.
Oh, like chicken pox. Everybody talks about it, we all know about it. You go in the local shops, have you heard?
In Tintwistle, it's a really neighbourly community. Everyone knows each other. If there's gossip, someone down the road will know about it in 10 minutes or so. Considering the crime rate was fairly non-existent, for a murder to happen, not only a murder, but a murder on this scale, it was completely shocking for the community.
I think local people found it extraordinary that such an incident could happen here. I think, like all major crimes that happen in what everybody would regard as somewhere quiet and peace-loving, it adds to people's fear that something else could happen, or something else could happen as a result of it.
Police immediately cordon off the crime scene.
The big issue you've got here is you're out in the open. So there's two things. There's the weather, so rain can come and wash away your evidence. But secondly, you've got the issue of privacy. This is a really busy road, there's lots of traffic coming through, and you need to protect the privacy of that individual. That's really important.
Really what you want to do is secure and preserve as much evidence as you can. So there would have been things like identifying where the scene is, making sure that it was cordoned off, that there was enough police officers to ensure that nobody stumbled across the scene.
Beyond the scene, you might be looking at further searches. Has anything discarded, any clothing, any weapons, etc. So this particular point is very important from a forensic point of view. So you would want to be able to get some of your experts down, you want your crime scene manager, you'd really want your pathologist to be coming down to having a look at the scene, just so they have a full understanding of what's here, so that they can do a better job down the line.
And what I would do there is I'd have a discussion with the crime scene manager about the best way of removing the body to a hospital, but also making sure that we didn't lose any evidence while we were in that process, because the evidence that you might lose might be the only evidence that you get that helps you with the case.
Once you start moving a body, then the issue there is a potential loss of evidence, so there'll be some sampling requirements there and then, even in the circumstances where a body's been burnt. For example, there may well be fibres that have been transferred from the offender to the body, or alternatively to the suitcase that haven't been damaged. It's really important to pick those up at that point.
The body is removed, and police focus on one thing.
But I think when you look at the wider picture around this is somebody's life. This is that they've lost, and you know what I really want to do is find out who the family is, who are the relatives and the friends of this individual, and they need informing at the earliest opportunity.
This was going to be a huge challenge for the police now, because there's absolutely nothing to go by. They've just found a torso. There's nothing to identify the person, no fingerprints.
When you're looking at the difficulty presented by not being able to make an identification, the first things that we considered were things like the police database, and then we started looking at people who were missing, but because we had quite a wide geographical area, it was looking at people who were perhaps missing from West Yorkshire, South Yorkshire, Greater Manchester, as well as Derbyshire. But it's an arterial route, could have been from anywhere.
With very little to go on, the pressure is on for the police to try to identify the body.
You head towards the things that you are quite confident that will bring about an identification. But then when the obvious start to go, then it progressively becomes more and more difficult. And you start considering any other locations or any other information that you may get that you think will help you identify who this person was. So it made it a really difficult inquiry where we were having to be very, very precise around the investigative tactics that we used to try and find out who were the people who were involved.
Whilst the police await lab results from the pathologist's examination of the body, their attention turns to other lines of inquiry.
So the first point of call for the police now would have been to conduct local inquiries, asking people if they'd seen anything, if they'd heard anything.
When these things initially happen, all sorts of stories start to abound.
But the question on everybody's lips is, who is the victim?
Foremost in my mind was, there is a family somewhere whose loved one has been murdered, and they don't know about it.
In the picturesque Peak District, police have launched a murder investigation after an unidentified body was discovered in a suitcase which had been set alight.
So the condition of the body when we found it, the head had been removed, both hands had been removed, and the feet had been removed. There were two things that I sort of realised quite quickly. One, that was a deposition site. That wasn't where the murder had taken place. That was where the body had been placed afterwards. And the second thing was, and it was around whether the victim and the offender knew each other. And I took the view that why would one take the steps to hide somebody's identity if they didn't know each other? So I sort of realised in my own mind that if I worked out who the victim was, I would be able to work out who the offender was. And if I worked out who the offender was, I'd be able to work out who the victim was.
Unable to identify their victim, police await the results of the post-mortem.
It's slightly unusual. There was no cause of death. So this tells us that there was no marks or scars or any wounds on the body parts that we had recovered, and clearly the victim's head had been removed. When we looked at the information that we did have from the post-mortem, this was a light-skinned male, and that's all that we were able really to glean from that. From the post-mortem, there were no marks, scars, tattoos or anything that would have assisted us making an identification.
Police trawl the missing persons database for any clues as to who their victim could be.
At the time, there was a lot of missing persons cases, so this could have been absolutely anybody.
There's quite a lot of missing people reported every single day in Derbyshire. And it was a case of refreshing those every single day, because the person may not be reported on day 1 or day 2 or day 3, but every single day going through the detail of who those individuals were and seeing if we could make a connection between the body that we got and that person who was missing.
With little to go on, Derbyshire Constabulary hold a press conference.
The purpose of today's press conference is to ask for the public's help to identify the victim. We are working with other forces to ascertain whether our victim may have been reported missing in a neighbouring county, but we recognise that he might not have been reported missing at all. We are therefore asking members of the public to come forward if they have not seen a neighbour or a friend or a colleague, or indeed any members of their family recently. A special call centre has been set up to take calls from across the UK, and we are urging people to provide information in relation to this murder investigation.
Information soon starts to filter into the police.
It became apparent that a number of dog walkers had seen the suitcase but hadn't realised exactly what was inside.
So in order to better understand the time frame that we're looking at and understand when the body may have been put in the car park, we did substantial inquiries with people who'd been on the road. We were asking for people who'd got dash cam footage or people that had driven past, and there were a few positive responses out of that, which were able to tell us that the fire had been set late the night before.
With 3 different drivers claiming to have seen a fire around 11:30 p.m. on the 9th of October, officers on the ground can now focus on who was in the area around that time, in a bid to identify the potential killer.
So that was really useful from the initial investigation point of view to be able to really narrow those timelines so you could concentrate on that time period and work out from there what the offender had done, where he'd been, where he'd likely to travel to and from.
Police now ramp up their inquiries.
There was a bolt out of the blue, and we got a conversation. We got a phone call in from South Yorkshire to inform us that there was actually an ANPR camera on the A628. So the phone call that we got on that day was, do you know you've got an ANPR camera on the 628? And no, we didn't, but thanks very much for telling us. That's really great.
Police immediately trawl through the automatic number plate recognition cameras to establish which vehicles had passed through the area on the night in question.
The police followed ANPR camera footage and located a Mercedes vehicle that triggered the camera just after 11 o'clock on Sunday the 9th, the evening before, and then didn't actually make it all the way across Woodhead Pass Road and to trigger the other ANPR camera at the other end.
It was the only vehicle that passed in the window of opportunity. So every other vehicle only went in one direction, either towards Manchester or towards Yorkshire.
All the vehicles, over 200 that had travelled along that road within the time period, down to one that had turned around and returned back to the Manchester area.
That was a strong indication that that vehicle was the one that deposited the body here on the night of the 9th.
After 10 days of round-the-clock investigations, and still having no clue as to the identity of their victim or suspect, this discovery is key.
The Mercedes triggered the camera on the evening before between 23:09 and 23:26. So straight away that was something I was very interested in, and we started to make some inquiries as to who might be the owner and what might be the significance of that vehicle.
This was absolutely key in the investigation. After 10 days of not finding anything, they needed to find out who this silver Mercedes belonged to.
As it happened, the vehicle didn't have any insurance, and so there was a reason to go and stop it and speak to the driver and have a look at the vehicle.
After further investigation, police discover that the vehicle is registered to someone living in Manchester.
So the owner of the vehicle was somebody called Ming Jiang.
Once the vehicle had been identified, it was registered to Ming Jiang, and therefore this triggered for the police to monitor him, make inquiries as to where he lived, inquiries of where he went.
There was so much pressure on the police. At this point in the investigation, it was very time sensitive. After 10 days, they really needed to find this person. At this point, the person who committed the crime could have run away, they could have covered up, or they could have very much so committed again.
Initial inquiries reveal Ming Jiang lives in Manchester, so Derbyshire Constabulary enlist the help of their colleagues over there.
When Greater Manchester Police assisted us, they were able to locate the vehicle, and because it was driven without any insurance, we were able to seize it. And when we seized the vehicle, we were then able to forensically examine it. And what I was looking for in that forensic examination was to find any evidence that might link to the body that we've got and the scene that we'd preserved some days before.
The police found a speck of blood in the rear that was the size of a 10p coin.
This was a really, really big moment in the investigation. What I would be looking to find out there is a blood spot in the boot of the vehicle the same as the blood that we found at the scene. So the DNA was sent away for comparison. It was the longest 24 hours I can imagine. Eventually it came back, and it came back with the news that we were really hoping for, and that was that the blood in the boot matched the DNA of the blood at the scene.
The blood match in the boot of the car puts Ming Jiang at the forefront of the investigation.
I felt this was the first time we were getting a breakthrough and first time we were getting an indication as to what may have taken place here. So as soon as we got the positive information about the DNA hit, it was a case of let's get this person arrested at the earliest opportunity.
So Ming Jiang was arrested on the 20th of October. They'd attended a casino in Manchester where they believed he was, and he was arrested at that location.
Now that the police have Ming Jiang in custody for questioning, time is of the essence to find evidence linking him to the murder.
What is also part of the inquiry is to start doing an evidential search around him to understand where he lived, what his movements were, and whether there was any other evidence that we'd be able to glean from his home address.
The police searched the home address and they found bloodstains all over the carpet. There was blood dispersion across all of the walls. They had been painted over and quite a shoddy clean-up had taken place. It was an extensive clean-up, but there was still blood throughout the flat and in the bathroom.
There was traces of blood absolutely everywhere that weren't immediately apparent to the eye. But there were things like the blood had seeped through the laminate flooring. There was blood that was soaked into the cushions on the sofa. There was blood on the walls and on the ceiling.
So the scene was a really rich source of evidence for us. The main evidence we got were 2 finger marks in blood. So we got one under a table, and the evidence you're really looking for there is the offender's fingerprint in the victim's blood. And getting that in 2 places was very, very critical evidence.
At this point, it's absolutely safe for the police to say that the murder took place in this apartment.
Ten days into the investigation of the body in the suitcase found in a Derbyshire village, police have discovered a car linked to the murder and have made an arrest.
A forensics team investigated the car. They swabbed the blood. This matched the torso that was found in the suitcase. So at this point, the police were then able to arrest Mr. Ming Jiang.
Forensic tests reveal the blood on the torso in the suitcase is a match for the blood in Jiang's flat in Manchester, making Ming Jiang their #1 suspect.
So the investigation moved over to Manchester because it became clear from the Derbyshire point of view that the offence had actually taken place in Manchester. As a result of their inquiries, that took them to the flats at Falconwood Way in Beswick. And as a result of what they found there, they felt very strongly that that was actually the place of the murder. And so as a result of that, that would then become a Manchester investigation.
But police are no closer to identifying their victim.
So as the inquiry goes on, the stress and the pressure builds. As a senior investigating officer, it's a privilege to do that role, but you do take the responsibility of having to investigate the death of somebody, and you owe that responsibility to the family of the victim. So I was really concerned about finding out who that was and getting that information to them at the earliest opportunity.
However, searches of their suspect and his car have led to a discovery.
When we did the evidential search of the Mercedes vehicle, we found some banking documents of another person called Yang Lu.
He had certain possessions on his person. At the time, he had his passport, he had his bank cards.
And that led us to an address in Salford at Media City. And there were some lines of inquiry that we needed to conduct at that address and find out what the relationship was with this person and how they fitted into the inquiry.
Police immediately sent officers to Yang Lu's address.
There was no answer, it was nowhere to be seen by anybody. So I made the decision that we were going to force entry into that apartment and find out really who this person was. So we forced entry into the address at Media City. Nothing particularly remarkable about the address, but what it did allow us to do was take some items from there which we knew the owner of that apartment would have left their DNA on. So very quickly we were able to send that away for analysis.
Finally, there is a breakthrough. Results come back matching Yang Lu's DNA to the torso, as well as the blood found in Ming Jiang's flat and car. Almost 2 weeks after the discovery, police have the name of their victim.
So what we did find out was that Yang Lu was a 27-year-old male, originally from China.
Yang Lu came to the UK in 2000 to study, where he went to the University of Leeds. His family actually worked really, really hard to save money so that he could study in the UK and achieve his goals and his dreams.
He finished his master's degree, and after that he stayed here and become a shares and stock trader.
He'd not brought any of his family with him over here, so if you look at the reasons why he may not have been reported missing, his family simply didn't know that he wasn't where he should have been.
Police now have the harrowing task of informing their victim's family.
This was a really difficult case from a family point of view. Under normal circumstances, we'd want to inform the family in person. And in the end, we actually had to make the call to the family in order to inform them. That's something that we wouldn't normally do under any circumstances, but unfortunately, with the distance involved, we had no other option. I arranged for contact through Interpol with the Chinese authorities in order to let the family know. In the meantime, we allocated family liaison officers in order that we could make the process as smooth as possible.
Yang's family were absolutely devastated when they found out, their only son had been murdered. Not only murdered, but in such a vicious way.
And then they arrived in the UK in the second week of November.
Yang was very close to his family. They spoke on the phone near enough every single day. He actually vowed to go back to China and look after his family if one of them was to fall ill. And I think that just shows the tight-knit relationship they have, because he'd built himself this fantastic life in the UK and he was really willing to give that up to go back and look after his family.
When the family was here, then I helped them in different ways because they can't speak English. So most of the time that if they have something do not understand about the police procedure, and I help to explain them.
They were completely grief-stricken. They had lost their only son, who had come to the United Kingdom to study at university. He was a very clever young academic man and a very bright young man, and they were deprived of their son.
With time running out to hold their suspect in custody, police need to work fast to build enough evidence to charge him.
Ming Jiang is a danger to the public, and we would really want to be in a position where he'd be charged at that point. The secondary issue is he's a big flight risk. We'd be worried about him kind of moving back to China or elsewhere.
We had to prove that he was the person that had committed that murder. We knew he was involved and could prove that to the extent, and we then had to build a case.
There's no doubt that Ming Jiang tried to cover his tracks quite extensively, but the problem is there was just too much evidence. The evidence there in particular was extremely strong. It's almost the best evidence you can find at a scene, which was Yang Lu's blood and Ming Jiang's fingerprint.
Police now believe Ming Jiang murdered Yang Lu in his flat, dismembered his body, and dumped his torso in a suitcase before setting light to it. But they need to work out the link between the pair and establish when the murder happened, so trawl CCTV footage in the days leading up to the discovery of the suitcase.
CCTV footage revealed a man getting off the tram in Manchester. He crossed the road to meet another man, and they went in the direction of a flat in Beswick.
That tram stop was the closest one to where Ming Jiang's home address was.
The male he met up with perfectly fit the description of Ming Jiang. And in addition to that, we had telephone evidence that showed the two phones of Ming Jiang and Yang Lu came together. And interestingly, from that point onwards, the phones always remained together. And that was the very last time that Yang Lu was seen.
With the evidence building, police make a decision.
So I authorised one charge of murder.
Ming Jiang denies any involvement in the murder, so the police and prosecution need to build a case for trial and establish a motive, meaning they have to delve deeper into the lives of the two men.
Yang Lu was definitely a responsible young man. He invested in stocks and shares, and he knew how to make money. He was very clever in that sense. He'd built himself this brand new life in the UK. He really had a bright future ahead of him. Yang really enjoyed gambling. He was a very big gambler. He'd go to casinos quite often. He always gambled within his means, though. He was never irresponsible in that respect. Even though he had the money to gamble, he never went above and beyond.
So Ming Jiang was in a very different situation to Yang Lu. Ming Jiang was originally from China. He moved over to the UK. He lived in the Beswick area in North Manchester. He rented that flat. At the time of the murder, he really was in serious debt problems. He'd spent quite a long time at casinos. He was a regular gambler. In fact, so much so that he had VIP status.
We believe that they met in a casino when they share the same interest to gamble. They met in the Manchester casino.
But Yang Lu could never have imagined that their relationship could be so deadly.
Ming Jiang was very well known in the casino community. In some casinos, he had quite specialised status due to the large amounts of money that he was gambling. Yet in other casinos, he had markers on him due to his erratic and volatile behaviour. It was my understanding that he was a great fun guy to be around when he was winning, but it was a very, very different case when he was losing.
He lost a huge amount of money, and as far as we know, is sort of a £200,000 debt, and he's been chasing by the debtor, the creditor within the community.
It was the Crown's case that Ming Jiang had accrued extensive debts. We had knowledge that he had historically acquired over £270,000 worth of debt within 2 casinos. He was struggling to pay off those debts. We knew that he had pawned some wristwatches for over £15,000 to try and keep the debtors at bay.
Getting more and more desperate to pay off his debts, it appears Ming Jiang hatched an evil plan.
Ming Jiang was in huge amounts of debt. He had no income or wherewithal with which to repay that debt, and the only way he believed he could do that was either through his addiction of gambling and waiting for the big win, or through extreme measures. He used the alternative of planning the murder of his friend.
When the police found Ming Jiang, he was actually in possession of Mr. Yang Lu's passport and his bank cards. So at this point, it's safe to assume that he was trying to assume his identity.
So Ming Jiang had taken Yang Lu's life and then he took his identity. He basically used all his personal information in order to extract money through his bank cards. He even tried to sell his flat, and he was making good progress on that at the point at which he'd been arrested. There was nothing that he wouldn't do in order to extract as much money and value out of Yang Lu.
In Manchester, Ming Jiang's trial for the murder of Yang Lu begins.
So the trial was conducted in April of 2017. Shortly prior to the trial hearing, we did meet with the victims' parents, and we had to reassure them that we would do our utmost to be able to obtain justice for their son.
The court hears how Ming Jiang had a checkered history.
Ming Jiang was a Hong Kong national. Before he came to the UK, he was working as cabin crew for a German airline, where he was actually convicted for credit card fraud.
The police found that he had convictions in Germany for shoplifting, convictions for identity fraud and forgery of documents in Switzerland. He had convictions for credit card fraud in Scotland. So as a result of that, as the reviewing lawyer, it was my job then to write international letters of request. I had to make formal requests to Germany and Switzerland to obtain evidence of those convictions, which we then subsequently at the trial hearing submitted as evidence of bad character.
The prosecution believes Ming Jiang was planning to use his experience of identity fraud to build a new life for himself.
It appeared quite clearly that Ming Jiang understood his way around the financial system, and the kind of things that he did and the way that he adopted the identity, for example, by using Yang Lu's phone to contact banks, etc. That showed quite a little bit of knowledge of how to basically defraud and use identity theft to his advantage.
This was premeditated, it was planned. He had devised a plan as to how he was going to assume his victim's identity and obtain all of his assets and walk away. He was probably going to walk away from his debts, take what money he could get from his victim and return to China. I believe that would have been his plan.
The motive behind the murder was quite clearly greed. It was obvious that Ming Jiang understood that Yang Lu had a lot of money. He lived in a nice area of Manchester. He owned his own flat. He dabbled in stocks and shares. And the concept that they'd had together, we believe that there would have been some understanding from Ming Jiang's point of view that Yang Lu was pretty wealthy.
During the trial, Ming Jiang's story changes several times.
Ming Jiang showed no remorse whatsoever throughout the whole process. He came out with bizarre and incredulous accounts, changing the overall story on a number of occasions. Initially, he claimed that Yang Lu was an escort and that they were in a relationship. There was absolutely no evidence to support that.
So he wasn't consistent in his account that he was providing to the police. He did pursue that through to the trial hearing and maintained that it was a different Chinese male called Mr. Wong who had committed the act of murder, and he tried to distance himself by using this fictional character.
He later on claimed that there was a kind of third-party gangster-type individual who was involved that Yang Lu owed money to. Again, from an investigation point of view, we were able to show that that simply wasn't the case.
Ming Jiang fabricated Mr. Wong, and he gave the phone number to the police. However, when the police checked the record of the phone, and it's find out that the phone number is only created a date before they believed Liu Yang died.
So all the explanations that Ming Jiang provided were easily discounted and showed that he was just making things up as he went along.
The jury is shown CCTV from the night police believe Yang Lu was murdered, in a bid to prove that Ming Jiang was the last to see him.
The evidence we used, we had a digital sequence of events that displayed all of the CCTV footage and the appropriate stills. So we had the stills showing that Ming Jiang was friends with the victim and that they had attended the casino together on the 3rd of October. And then subsequently, Ming Jiang had clearly lured him to his flat on the 5th of October, and we had a still digital photo of Yang Lu leaving the Metrolink tram stop at Velo Park, which was the closest one to Ming Jiang's home address.
From a CCTV point of view, that was the last point at which Yang Lu had been seen, so that was on the 5th of October.
So his movements shortly after the time that we believe that he had killed Yang Lu, he used the bank cards that he'd acquired. He used them at B&Q to purchase cleaning products, paint with which to paint the flat. He went to the petrol station on numerous occasions, and he was seen to be filling one, if not two, containers of petrol, which we then subsequently believe that he used to set the body on fire.
Having killed his supposed friend and made attempts to clean the evidence, it appears Ming Jiang goes back to doing what he loves best.
In the early hours of the 6th of October, Ming Jiang spent 30 minutes at the casino. He also spent time at the casino after the deposition. So in the early hours of the 10th of October, he spent around 4 hours. And if you can imagine, he literally just taken the torso of the body, he's dumped it up in Tinswhistle, and then he set it on fire, returned back to his flat, and the first thing he does is head to the casino to spend Yang Lu's money and gamble.
His actions aren't the actions of what you would expect a normal person to do. And it's a terrible thing to murder somebody. But then to murder somebody and dismember the body and then dump it and set on fire, it's just an incredibly callous act, and it probably speaks a lot about his character.
After hearing the evidence, the jury retires to consider its verdict.
So the jury in this case sat for 4 weeks, and under normal circumstances, you generally expect around about a day's deliberation per week. So under normal circumstances, it would take 4 days to come to a decision. But in this case, it only took them 4 hours, and that shows you really how overwhelming the evidence was.
After weeks of evidence is a very short period of time. And I believe would demonstrate that they were absolutely sure in a very short space of time that Ming Jiang was guilty of this offence.
At the point that they gave their verdict, Ming Jiang was completely emotionless. He showed nothing at all. At that point, he went back into custody and sentencing took place a week later. The judge actually sentenced him in his absence because he refused to come to court.
The presiding judge made a point of stating that the starting point for a sentence would be 30 years due to it being solely the sole purpose being for gain and in this case for money. However, he outlined aggravating features such as the extensive dismemberment of the body, the complete lack of remorse, and the misleading of evidence. And he made a point of saying that it might be that the authorities never deem him to be safe to be returned to the community and that he could spend the rest of his life in prison.
On the 2nd of May, 2017, Ming Jiang is sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 33 years. He has never revealed the whereabouts of Yang Lu's limbs or head.
The saddest thing about this murder is Ming Jiang's greed caused the loss of the life of a young 36-year-old man, leaving behind two very grief-stricken, distraught parents.
His family didn't know the last time they spoke to him on the phone, the last time they saw him in person was going to be the last time. I think, yeah, it's really devastating that they never got to say goodbye to their only son.
The killing of a grandmother, a mother and her two daughters sparked the biggest investigation Wales has ever seen, leading to 3 suspects within the police. The chilling Murder in the Valleys continues new Wednesday at 9.
I never intended to help anyone. It wasn't a reflex either. It was just a careless act of helping someone by accident. This incident had a significant impact on my life. Unbeknownst to me, those around me started creating a version of me that wasn't really me. I had no choice but to accept this strange situation. I was expected to live not the life I wanted, but the life others wanted for me. At first, it was painful. One day, I was surprised to realize I no longer felt anything. That incident. When I rushed into the house that was about to be engulfed in flames, it wasn't out of a desire to help or a reflex. I merely entrusted my life to the whims of whatever God was out there. As a result, I survived and am still alive today. Whether it was the act of a God or not is questionable, but a mark was left on my body, as if to remind me that my life was spared. It's been 10 years since then. Labeled a good person, I was obligated to live up to that image. The real me doesn't exist. It's the good person version of me walking through life. I took a job at a local advertising agency because I didn't want to leave my grandmother who raised me alone. My parents divorced when I was young, and each of them has built happy families since then. In other words, I was a discarded child. During the divorce, there was a huge argument because neither parent wanted to take me. They both had new partners, after all. A child would be a burden in a divorce. I was raised by my grandparents. I don't think I was a problematic child, misbehaving or being a shut-in. My grandparents who raised me with love have passed away. In the spring, when there was no longer a reason for me to stay in my hometown, a transfer order suddenly came my way. It was a transfer to the head office's sales department. Seeing this as an opportunity, I quickly sold the house and land I inherited from my grandparents and prepared to start a new life in a new place. But all that effort was wasted on the first day. David is a person full of integrity and courage, who once saved a girl's life by rushing into a burning house when he was in high school. Tom, the manager, introduced me this way during the morning assembly on my first day after the transfer, and my world went dark. I wanted a fresh start. I was serious about it. But my new colleagues looked at me the same way people in my hometown did. In that moment of despair, it was clear that even here, I couldn't be my true self. That personal story doesn't matter. A cold, exasperated voice said. I instinctively looked to see who spoke. There stood a woman with long, loosely curled hair, sharply dressed in a suit. She looked like a career woman and seemed unapproachable. But she was incredibly beautiful. I could believe it if someone said she was an actress. Her makeup was flawless, and her posture was perfectly straight. She exuded confidence. David, this is our chief, Anna. She will be your direct supervisor. Tom addressed me, seemingly ignoring her words. It looked like she would be my mentor as well. I'm David. Nice to meet you. I greeted her. She looked me up and down, as if appraising me. I got a slightly unpleasant feeling. I'm Anna. Prove your worth to me by working hard, she said, completely dismissing my attempt to reach out. I sighed deeply inside. My new life seemed full of challenges, and I worried if I could make it. I couldn't imagine myself working well with this beautiful but stern boss. The only saving grace was the kindness of my colleagues. They quickly accepted me, the newcomer, and taught me the ropes, despite my lack of sales experience. Thanks to their help, I managed to fit into the new workplace by the end of the first month. Every day, I faced reprimands and harsh words from Anna. Initially, her words made me upset and depressed, but upon reflection, I realized she wasn't wrong. After that realization, I could accept her harsh words more sincerely. As a result, my sales performance began to improve rapidly. Now, I am grateful to her. It looks like you've finally grown into a decent employee. Let's have the welcome party we've postponed, Anna said to me around 2 months after my transfer to the head office. The welcome party was supposed to be held when I first transferred. The one who put a stop to it was, of course, Anna. She directly appealed to Tom, insisting that I needed to learn the job first before having a welcome party. I also asked him, please prioritize work next to Anna. The fact that a welcome party was being planned meant I had met Anna's standards. I was more pleased about that than the actual party and couldn't help but grin. Thank you. You're still just halfway there. Anna gave a wry smile in response to my loud expression of gratitude. It was the first time I saw her smile. Even if it was just a wry smile. Even so, she looked incredibly attractive. The welcome party was held at a small Spanish restaurant that we had rented out. It had a small courtyard with tables, creating an open and inviting atmosphere. My colleagues seemed to be in high spirits in this relaxed setting. After the initial greetings and a toast, everyone started eating and drinking freely. This kind of party was a new experience for me. It felt very urban, making me feel a bit out of place as someone from the countryside. As I reacted appropriately to the conversations of my teammates, I thought about this. It made me realize that I still hadn't quite adjusted to this city. I sighed quietly, trying not to draw attention, and looked around the venue for a quiet spot to drink. In the courtyard, I noticed Anna sitting alone on a bench, sipping her drink. I discreetly slipped away from my colleagues, grabbed a few pinchos on a plate, and approached her. Anna, may I sit here? I asked softly. She looked up from her drink and glared at me. Her eyes were slightly red, which was surprisingly alluring. She seemed tipsy, but her gaze was steady. I might have chosen a bad time to approach her. A cold sweat ran down my back. Sure, she said, slightly slurring her words, and scooted over to make space for me. Having come this far, there was no way I could say, never mind, so I cautiously sat down on the bench. I caught a glimpse of Anna's profile, and it wasn't her usual stern boss look, she just looked like a regular drunk. A really beautiful drunk, at that. Here, have some. When I offered the plate of pinchos, Anna's eyes lit up with delight. The contrast with her workplace demeanor left me speechless. You are thoughtful. Thanks. She happily munched on a pincho, clearly in high spirits. She swung her legs like a child, causing her elegant high heels to dangle precariously from her toes. You seem in a good mood. I just love good food and good drinks. She reached for a second pincho as she spoke. It was clear she had been drinking quite a bit. Right after the toast, she had been her usual self. Perhaps she wasn't very good with alcohol. Hey, tell me about your heroic story. Tom mentioned it on your first day, she said with drowsy eyes. I sighed softly. It's not a story to tell to a drunk person. But with Anna looking up at me with eager eyes, I couldn't bring myself to refuse. It's not much of a story. I prefaced my tale before starting to talk. It happened when I was 17. It's a day I don't like to remember, as it was the worst day of my life. After my parents divorced, I was raised by my grandparents. I foolishly believed that one day either my father or mother would come back for me. My grandparents didn't talk much about my parents, which only fueled my faint hope. If they had bluntly told me, "You're an unwanted child," it might have hurt less. By the time I was in high school, I had various ways to search for my parents. I secretly looked for them, believing there was a reason they hadn't come for me. Eventually, I succeeded in finding their whereabouts. Back then, I believed there was a reason they hadn't come for me, and I was convinced that if I visited them, they would welcome me with open arms. That naive hope was quickly shattered. Both my mother and father were living happily with their new families. I remember feeling tears well up as I watched from a street corner while my father's family enjoyed a barbecue in their yard. I couldn't bring myself to call out to them. My mother was even worse. When I visited, she asked in a panic, "Do you need money?" Apparently, she had told her current husband that she had no children from her previous marriage. She panicked, thinking I had come to blackmail her for money. I wasn't welcomed or apologized to, just treated as a nuisance. Deeply hurt, I left my mother's place without shedding a tear. In my hand were several crumpled $100 bills that she had thrust at me. I see. My parents are divorced too. I guess you and I are alike. So, did you run into the fire on that same day? Anna sighed, her eyes distant as if remembering something. Encouraged to continue, I resumed my story slowly. While walking in a daze, I saw flames rising from a small one-story house. The fire trucks hadn't arrived yet, and neighbors were trying to extinguish the fire with garden hoses. I watched in a daze, blending in with the onlookers. Someone gasped, and when I turned around I saw a girl with her mouth covered in frozen. She must have been connected to the burning house. When I tried to speak to her as she trembled, she noticed me, looked startled as if she was about to jump, and then turned on her heel and ran away. The fire truck still hadn't arrived. Having come to this town for the first time to visit my mother, I had no sense of the area. I didn't know who lived in that house or who might be inside at that time. But from the panic around me, I could tell someone was trapped inside.